A lot of people ask questions about the difference between RAW and JPEG when it comes to Lightroom, and I figured I'd do a very quick video here just to show you there's really only two differences. Okay, there's only two places where you would notice a difference if you were using a JPEG instead of RAW. Otherwise, Lightroom handles JPEGs, RAW files, TIFFs, PSD files. It handles them all the same, and it doesn't really matter. But let's jump in here. The first place that you would see it would be in the white balance area of the develop module. All right. Now this is a JPEG photo. If you look under the white balance presets, it says as shot, auto custom. So that's all I see here. I can still use the white balance temperature and tint sliders, and I can still do everything that I normally could, except I don't have all the presets that we would have inside of our camera. Now, if you jump over here to a RAW file, and I click on that same list, you're going to see that there's auto, daylight, cloudy, shade, tungsten, fluorescent, flash custom. So all the things that you would see inside of your camera, all the different white balance settings that you could choose would be available here for a RAW file. Again, you can still use the eyedropper, you can still use the temperature and tint slider, so nothing changes other than that list. The only other place that you'll find a difference between JPEG and RAW would be under camera calibration, and this would be under profile. What this deals with is if you shoot inside of your camera, you've got these little picture controls or picture styles you can set with, like they might have sharpening and contrast and some extra color saturation and whatnot. A lot of them are geared toward landscapes or portraits. You can set a picture style for a portrait, whatever it happens to be. So you can set those in your camera. The thing is when you shoot in JPEG, those settings actually get baked into the JPEG photo. All the sharpening and all the saturation and all the extra contrast and all that, they actually get baked into your photo. If you shoot in RAW, your photo looks contrastier and more saturated and sharpened, whatever settings you chose on the back of your LCD when you're shooting. But what happens is when you bring that RAW file here into Lightroom, Lightroom discards all that. All right, Lightroom, if you're shooting RAW and you're bringing it into Lightroom, Lightroom's thinking, well, hey, he's shooting RAW, he's bringing it into Lightroom, he must just want to see the RAW file. Okay, if you wanted to see all that other stuff, the way that you can do that is to go to these profiles and you can choose. So for example, on my Nikon, some of the profiles that I could choose in the camera would be landscape, portrait, vivid, all these different things. Well, instead of having them baked into the JPEG file, Lightroom will just show me the default RAW file, but I could always come in here and I can choose camera landscape. And you can see the difference there. Click this little toggle switch. That's before, that's after. So it's a little bit more contrasty, a little bit more saturated. I jump over here to vivid. You see it changes a little bit. I can go to standard, gets a little bit flatter. Portrait actually works great on portraits, but it doesn't do so well for landscapes here. So you can change that after the fact when you're shooting in RAW. Remember, you're not losing it if you're shooting in JPEG. You're just losing the ability to change it when you shoot in JPEG. But when you shoot in RAW, you have the ability to come in here and change it all you'd like, or just go back to Adobe Standard and get rid of it. So Lightroom's just thinking, hey, he's shooting in RAW, he just wants to see the RAW photo without all the other extra stuff kind of baked into it, any of that little secret sauce. Okay, so that's really your main difference between RAW and JPEG. As far as the settings go, Lightroom doesn't really care. What I'll tell you is this: if I have a photo like this where you can see the sky is fairly overexposed here, all right. So if I have a photo like this and it's a RAW photo, I'm gonna have a lot better luck bringing the exposure down and actually recovering the detail that was up here in that sky. And to go with it, I'm actually going to have a lot of luck bringing up the shadows to recover any detail that was lost here in the shadows. That's with a RAW photo, because a RAW photo has more information in it. Okay, if it were a JPEG photo, I'm going to have less luck bringing this back. I'll still be able to bring a lot of it back, but I'm going to have less luck. In this example, I'd probably be able to bring it back just as well as I did with a RAW file. If the photo looks something like this, okay, and on the back of your camera, you've got this blinking at you, right? This is happening on the back of your camera, and you see this blinking at you. You're not going to have a whole lot of luck in bringing that detail back on a JPEG photo, but honestly, you're not going to have a whole lot of luck bringing it back on a RAW photo too. I would argue, if I could be so bold as to say that if you walk away from a photo shoot and you've got this blinking at you on the back of your camera, and this is what your photo looks like, you've got some bigger problems that you should be worrying about on other than whether or not you should be shooting in JPEG or RAW. You've got some in-camera problems and some exposure problems that you should probably start to look at when it comes to shooting, rather than worrying about whether you're shooting in JPEG or RAW. So your RAW photos are definitely going to bring back a little bit more information. Don't forget your JPEG photos are still lots of information in there too. You'll be able to bring that back as well. But really the main differences as far as settings go are going to be in white balance, and then down here in that camera calibration panel. If you ever open a photo in the develop module in Lightroom and you see this little like thunderbolt looking thing up here in the top right corner next to the histogram panel, and if you hover over it says process 2010. This is something I kind of just want to make you aware of what it is. A lot of times it doesn't even mean it needs action. It's an actionable item, but I just want to make you aware of what it is and what some of the differences are, especially if you're ever looking at another Lightroom video. Maybe you'll see some different changes or whatnot. So what Adobe does is, if you come down here to the camera calibration panel and you go under the process section, what you're going to see is 2012, 2010, and 2003. These are different versions of the raw conversion engine, all the code behind the scenes that Adobe is using to process your photos. These are different versions. What could happen, all right, and this is really the only time that this would happen, is if you opened up a photo, you brought a photo into Lightroom that was edited in an earlier version of Lightroom. All right. So let's say I've upgraded from Lightroom 3 to Lightroom 5. Well, chances are all old photos that you've edited in Lightroom 3, you're going to see this little lightning bolt up here. Because what it's telling you is that you've edited this in the 2010 process version, the 2010 underlying code versions of what Adobe's using behind the scenes. Now, it doesn't mean it's a bad thing. All right, I just want to make you aware of it. So there's a couple choices that you have at this point. The first choice is, if you're happy with the photo, leave it alone. You don't have to do anything. That's why I said it's not an actionable item. It doesn't mean like, wow, this is wrong, you got to do something with it. If you're happy with the photo, leave it alone. All right, there's no further action required here. If you ever decided you wanted to re-edit the photo using the newer technology, well, then you can go in here and do that. And the main reason Adobe doesn't do it for you is let's go take a look up here in the basic panel. All right, in the earlier process version, 2010 and 2003, you're going to see different sliders like recovery and fill light. All right, you're going to see different sliders inside here, blacks, brightness. These are different sliders that don't really exist inside of Lightroom 4 and Lightroom 5, the newer process versions. And so what happens is Adobe, if I go in here and I change it to 2012, watch what happens. See how the photo just changed? So Adobe doesn't want to do it for you, because your photo can change. And then they're saying, well, we don't want to change your photo for you, so we're going to let you decide if you want to. So if you're using an older one, that would be 2010 or 2003, in the basic panel, you're going to see some different sliders here. Again, the blacks, the recovery, the fill light, all that stuff. If you're using 2012, so 2010, remember, let me jump back up here. 2010, recovery, fill light, contrast, or brightness, different sliders. If you go down here and you change it to 2012, that's where you see the latest and greatest, which is highlights, shadows, whites, blacks. And personally, I like them better. All right, I like it better this way. So typically, if I ever do see that little lightning bolt up there and I'm looking at a photo, a lot of times I'll come in here and I'll re-edit using the newer technology, just because personally I feel that they work a little bit better. But again, let's talk about the paths that you can go. You'll only see this if you're working with a photo in Lightroom that's been edited in an earlier version of Lightroom, like Lightroom 1 or Lightroom 2 or Lightroom 3. It's the only time that you'll see this. You're not going to see it with a newer version of Lightroom. When you do see it, your first choice is, do I want to do something with the photo? If I'm happy with the photo, I don't need to make any adjustments. I don't need to change anything. If I decide I want to re-edit the photo, then just come down here. You can go to the camera calibration panel and change it, or just click on that little lightning bolt up here, that little thunderbolt. Just click on it, and it'll tell you right up here that you can go ahead and update to the newer process version, and it'll accept those changes. All right, so that's the whole process version. Think of it this way. Think of it as different versions of a software. All right, it's kind of like you have Photoshop CS4, Photoshop CS5, Photoshop CS6. It's kind of like being able to flip between different versions of the software. That's almost kind of like what the process version is. You're able to flip between different versions and use the technology that was available for those versions. All right, so process version, don't worry too much about it. If you like your photo the way it is, leave it. If you want to re-edit it, just update it to the new one. Well, I kind of mentioned what camera profiles were back in the first video about the develop module when we talked about the differences between RAW and JPEG. But let's just kind of dive into them for a quick second here, because I got a little tip for you. Camera profiles. You come down to your camera calibration panel, and these profiles are things that simulate what you could set inside of your camera. So all different cameras have all these little picture styles or picture controls that add contrast and saturation and all these things to your photos. Camera profiles, because you're shooting in RAW, if you're shooting RAW, remember, back in that video I mentioned, if you're shooting in JPEG, that stuff gets baked in. So you can't change these profiles. You'll come over here, it just says embedded. Because it's a JPEG photo, it's already baked into your photo. With a RAW photo, though, Adobe strips any profile you shot in camera, and it will let you, it's going to give you the standard profile here, but it will let you switch to some of the ones you can use in your camera. By the way, these are very much camera specific. So they're different for Nikons and Canons and all different cameras. Some cameras don't have any of them built into Lightroom. So just keep that in mind. If you're not seeing what I'm seeing, you're either A, have a JPEG photo, or B, it's a RAW photo that's just not supported with the profiles. But the idea here is you can come in here, you can click on a profile like Vivid, and it's just a different starting place for your photo. Kind of snaps the colors and the contrast a little bit. You can go over to Portrait. I think Portrait works great for portraits. All right, you can kind of see it before and then after there. It kind of flattens it out a little bit, but I like what it does to the skin tones, and you could always enhance the colors later. But it's just a better or different starting place. So that's what your camera profiles are. What I want to do is give you a quick tip here, because what will happen is a lot of people ask, how, I love the landscape portrait. How can I apply that to my photos automatically? We're going to show you some ways in these videos that that you can synchronize, okay? And I don't want to jump too far ahead, but I am going to show you a way where you can make a change to this photo and eventually then apply it to all the other photos. But there is a quick tip here in that if you want to apply it ahead of time, because applying it to this photo and then applying it to 10 others after implies that you're realizing after the fact. But sometimes when you're importing photos, like this was a shoot that I did. It's all a portrait shoot, right? I would probably like to apply the camera portrait one to all of them, and I could do that on import. The way that I would do it is I'd come over to my presets panel, click that little plus icon, and then hit check none, turn on calibration, and I could call it camera portrait profile. Hit create. All right, and of course I didn't even change it, but I'll change it to camera portrait. Since I already created one, I can right click on it and choose update with current settings and make sure that that's click update. So it's applying the camera portrait profile, and you can see that in that if I change it back to Adobe standard, right? Let me click on this and you'll see it change. Watch. All right, so it did change. Well, now when you do your import, and we talked about this in the import dialog, when you do your import, when you go under apply during import, there's something called develop settings. You can go to the folder that has your presets, and I can apply that portrait profile to all my photos as I do the import. So it's automatically going to have that profile set. I don't have to go in there after the fact and change it. So there's a little tip, kind of two things there. We talked about what the profiles were in another video already, but here's what I think a really good way to be able to use them is to be able to apply them to your photos right as you're doing your import, so you don't have to come in after the fact and then change it. Cropping's really simple. You've got the crop tool right in this little toolbar. Basically, you have your histogram at the top. Okay, right below the histogram is your little tools that we have access to here. The first one is the crop tool. By the way, you can always press the letter R to get to the crop tool, no matter where you are in Lightroom. I could be in the library module, and if I hit the letter R, it takes me over to the develop module to the crop tool. Pretty, not too much to this one, pretty self-explanatory. You click on handles, You can drag your crop around. I can make you dizzy. Whoa, sorry. You click on handles, you drag your crop around, and click here and kind of drag it up a little bit. All right. Right now it's a free form, free crop where I'm cropping any way, any direction, any aspect ratio. You can of course come over here and go under the aspect section and change it to a specific aspect ratio. So if you wanted to crop to an 8:10 slash 4:5, because they're both the same aspect ratio, then it forces you into that aspect ratio. All right. If you can put your cursor right in the middle here, you can move it around. You can also rotate just by moving it to the side, so I can even add a little tilt. If you press the letter R again, it exits you out of crop mode. All right, so I can press R to get back in. Remember, cropping, as is everything we do in Lightroom, is all non-destructive. So, no matter what I do to this photo, I can now come in here and adjust the exposure and the highlights and all the different things. If I go back to the crop tool, I'm still going to have everything in here. So I'll be able to go back and recrop it if I need to. Let's go ahead. We can reset here. There is a little lock icon. So once you do get an aspect ratio that you want, if you want to lock the original aspect ratio, just click that little lock icon. And now instead of being able to go freeform with it, it's locked into that aspect. If you want to switch from a horizontal to vertical, just press the letter X. X switches over to vertical, and then X switches right back over to horizontal. And then the last thing here, I'm going to hit reset. And let's just go close that out. I'm going to just jump into a different folder here and take a look at this photo. Kind of crooked horizon here. We go into the crop tool. There is a straightening tool. It's that little level that we have right there. Just click on it, and then all you got to do is just click and drag along whatever it is that you want to be straight. All right, so whatever it is you want to be horizontal in this case, just click and drag right along it. Lightroom will automatically go in there and it'll straighten it for you. Now, one last thing about the crop tool. We are cropping it. If you're coming from a Photoshop world, not Photoshop World, the conference, you're using Photoshop a lot and you're just getting into Lightroom. When you crop in Photoshop, a lot of times we're cropping to a specific size, meaning I want to crop this photo to an 8" by 10" photo, or a 5" by 7" photo. You'll notice when you come into your aspect ratio, look what it says. It says 4:5 slash 8:10. It's because when we're cropping in Lightroom, we're not actually resizing the photo. We're not going in and resizing everything. We're just saying we want an aspect ratio that is 8:10. And that's why it says 4:5, because they're both the same thing. The aspect ratio is the same. We haven't resized it to an 8" by a 10" photo yet. We don't do the resizing, and you saw this back in the videos where we talked about importing and organizing everything. We talked about getting our photos out of Lightroom. We don't do resizing until we get into the export dialog box, where we can go into image sizing, and now we can come in here and we can actually resize our image, and I could say I want it to be an 8" by 10" image. That's where the image gets resized. All right, so the image doesn't get resized here in the develop module. It's either in the export, or if we were going to go into the print module, I would select 8" by 10" paper, and Lightroom would fit my image to that paper. All right, so just kind of understand that if you're coming from using Photoshop and cropping in Photoshop a lot, there's a reason why it says 8:10, 4:5, 2:3, 4:6. Because it's just working with an aspect ratio at this point. We're not actually resizing. But just remember that little keyboard shortcut too, R, to get into the crop tool. Really, really handy keyboard shortcut, because no matter where you are in Lightroom, you can press it and it'll take you right there. All right, let's talk white balance. So white balance is the overall color temperature of your photo here. And we're going to talk about it from a couple of different aspects. One of them being kind of a more technical aspect, and then one of them being more of a creative aspect. So earlier you might have heard me mention, if you go under the little list here next to the WB icon, you'll see all the little white balance options that you would see inside your camera. And if you're not, this is only if you're shooting in RAW. If you're shooting in JPEG, you're not going to see all those things because you can't change it. You can change the slider still, but you're not going to be able to change it this way. But if you're shooting in RAW, you'll see everything there. Let's talk about the more technical way to use white balance. Essentially, it's color temperature. It's the overall color feel of your photo. there's a couple of different ways to fix it. One of the more technical ways would be to put some type of a gray card into your photo. And what that'll do is that'll give you a point of reference. Okay, it'll, based on the lighting that's around you, it'll give you a point of reference of something that should be gray. Lightroom will know, well, hey, this should be gray, and if it's not gray, it can make adjustments. So in this example here, we have a gray card. It's got a white, a black, a dark gray, and what you generally want to use is kind of like it's like a 17-18% gray. I wouldn't stretch too much about how much gray it is. To me, as long as it's some shade of gray, we're good. So don't kill yourself if it's not like the perfect, 17.5% gray or whatever the gray card is supposed to be. But what you do is you just take your white balance eyedropper and you just click on something that should be white, or something that should be not white, but a light gray. All right, and in this case, we have one right here. Now, if you look at the little grid that's showing up, it even shows you the RGB values. So red, 80%, green, 79%. So those are actually pretty close. And then blue is pretty low at 75%. How do you know it's neutral? Neutral means red, green, and blue are all the same. So we can tell here there's a little bit of an offset. All right, there's a little bit of an offset on the green, and there's a little bit of offset on the blue. Well, just looking at this photo, I kind of know the photo looks warm. I took the photo on a gray background. It was a gray backdrop, and you can see the gray backdrop has a muddy type of a color. And if I hover over it, you can see 32, 31, again, same thing. Those are pretty close, but look at the blue, that's low. So if we wanted to counteract that, what would you do? We know that the photo looks warm. We want to counteract that. Well, we would want to cool it down a little bit. Well, that's what happens when you click with this eyedropper. All right, all you got to do is just click on something that should be gray and watch what happens. You'll even see the temperature and tint sliders move a little bit. Watch, I'll click now. See how they moved? And it automatically adjusted the color temperature of the photo. Here, I'll undo, so it has a very warm look, and then I'll come over here and click again, adjusted it. All right, so we don't have that muddy color in the background. I'll even make it, I'll undo, I'll even make it a little bit worse, right? I'll make this like really warm, and I'll come over here, take the eyedropper, click. And now you can see a big difference. Here's another one that I did, just a different type of a color target. Really, to me, this is the only color target that you really need. This is more for if you're shooting in catalogs and have a more complex workflow with other people. But a different color target, again, I did this on purpose. I really whacked out the white balance on this one. So in camera, so I'm going to take that eyedropper and just click it on one of these little gray options back here, or I'll click on the gray background and watch. And look at the numbers, 32, 31. Again, those are pretty close, but blue is way high. So what's it going to do? It's going to move that temperature slider over to the right to warm it. And that's exactly what it did. So now we have a color balanced photo. So that's the more technical aspect of white balance. If you really need something, you'd want to put some sort of a gray card in here, something that you have a reference point from that you can click on and adjust. Now let's talk about the creative aspect of white balance. Creatively, you can come down here. Even though this is a raw photo, I could change all the raw options here. I could go with cloudy if I wanted to. I could come over here and maybe go with daylight. All right, I'm going to undo a couple times. Let's get it back to where we were. I could work with it that way with the preset list, or I can adjust the temperature and tint sliders. And this is where it gets creative, because as a photographer, a lot of times you're in charge of the creativity of the color balance. How does the photo feel? It doesn't have to be exactly as it was out there, but for me, this was the blue hour. This was probably about a half hour to maybe 20-30 minutes after sunset, and it had a very blue, almost pink and magenta feel to it. So I would take the temperature slider and move it over, because this is more kind of indicative of the scene that I was in, and maybe even move the tint slider over to add a little bit of a magenta. Okay, gives the whole scene almost a purpley type of a feel to it, and that sheen across the ply here, that's really what it felt. It was just had this, the whole thing out there had this very pink feel to it. All right, a pinkish blue feel to it when you were standing out there at this point after sunset. So we can adjust that, or if it felt warm, or if you want to make it feel warmer, you want that feeling to it, move it over toward the yellow side. That's really all this is creative control over your color temperature in the photo. So you can use the white balance eyedropper, You can use the preset list if you shot in RAW, or you can use the sliders. Just so you know, they all do the same thing. They all move the sliders. If I move this, watch what happens. Look at the sliders. See, they all do the same thing. They all move sliders. How you get there and why you get there is just different. Is it going to be technical? Is it going to be creative? Which one kind of suits your situation better? If it's me, most of the time, I kind of run through a few different presets, and then once in a while I'll come down here and I'll just tweak the sliders a little bit once I find one here that I really like. Let's talk a little bit about the basic panel here. When I say basic panel, we just talked about white balance, but we're going to go down here to the toning sliders. Okay, these are the overall toning. Rather than just do a video on each slider, you very rarely use just one slider. It's using them all in combination with each other. That's how you're going to work on your photos. So we'll work on a couple of different examples here. Exposure. Pretty self-explanatory, you know, everything brighter, everything darker. Think of exposure as like the sledgehammer, right? This moves everything. Everything gets brighter or darker. Contrast adds more contrast, right? Highlights works on the really bright parts of the photo. Shadows works on things that are hidden in the shadows. And whites and blacks is kind of a good way to just add a little bit of snap to your photo when it's done, a little bit of contrast, kind of make sure that you do have a white point or a black point if that photo needs it. And we'll show you how to use each one of these. So in this photo example, would I go right to exposure? Probably not. I think the photo overall is probably a little bit bright. There's some hot spots up here in the hair and on the shoulder and whatnot. If you go up here to the histogram, and you can look at the histogram, but if you click on these little triangles here, see, there's a triangle there and there's a triangle there. If you click on those, it turns on your highlight clipping warnings. And as I increase my exposure, see, you could see that it's showing me that these areas up here are clipped. All right, meaning there's no detail. It's losing detail because they're becoming all white. So you can check your photos. You can check to see if there's detail that's lost by turning these little triangles on. And by the way, the keyboard shortcut to turn them both on or both off is the letter J. So just press J. All right, back over here. So highlights. Working on the highlights here. What's clipped? Well, let's press J. We'll turn on the clipping warning. We see that we lost some detail here, but I think overall it's kind of bright up here in the hair. I could pull the highlights back. All right, just take the highlight slider, bring it to the left, and you can see those areas go away. Look on her shirt. You can see it go away. So I can pull those areas back a little bit, and that'll just tame some of those bright areas. Shadows. This is going to be any detail hidden in the shadows. Really, at this point, I mean, this is, 9 o'clock in the morning. There's not many shadows. There's a little bit of maybe back here in her hair, but it's nothing that we really need. So there's no shadow detail at this point that's lost. And then what I do with whites and blacks is I hold down the Option key on Mac, Alt on PC, and I let Lightroom help me figure out a white and black point. What I mean by that is if you hold down Option or Alt, click on the white slider, everything goes black, and when you drag it to the right, it shows you what becomes the white point. I'll usually stop when I hit one, all right? And then even pull back a little bit here just so it's not too white. Same thing with blacks. Option or Alt click on it, drag it to the left. It shows you these little specks there that's going to become a black point. I'm okay with that. I'm going to turn off the clipping warnings, by the way. Just press J. And but now you have just a little more contrast to the photo. Kind of evens out. If you think of the histogram, it kind of evens out the histogram. And make sure you got a point over here. Make sure you got a point over here. Now, that's not to say that every photo has a white and black point. When we get to something like this, the sky wasn't white. So there's really nothing in this photo that should be white. So I wouldn't have a white point. So you can't look at it as a formula because not every photo is going to have a white point. And that's really up to you to decide to figure was something white in the scene. Because if something wasn't white, you shouldn't have something that is white that shows up as bright as white would be. All right. So that's pretty much how I use it. Okay, you just work on these sliders. Overall, what I come over here, maybe bring the exposure down just a hair, but not too much. Maybe add a little bit more contrast, and that takes care of that photo. But that's on a portrait outdoors. You can kind of see where you get the highlights and shadows in there. Let's take something else here. So we have a different photo, and in fact, let's jump over here. This will be even better. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to reset all these sliders to 0. All right, and the way you reset them, by the way, here's a little tip for you. If you have a bunch of sliders that are moved, you can hold down your Option key on Mac, Alt on PC. Watch what happens. See how it says reset tone? I can click on it. It'll reset all the sliders. All right, so neat little tip there to keep you from dragging each one back to 0. So again, exposure. I might pull this one down just a hair. What do we have here? We have some area in the sky that looks pretty bright. So I can pull my highlight slider down. So that's going to darken the sky. Then I'll come over here and open up the shadows. See how much area that I can open up inside of this. See how much detail is still there that I can open up. You got to be careful though, because what's hidden in the shadows? Noise. So you can't go crazy with it. If they were black, you try to make them bright again, it's going to be hard to pull the detail out. We'll come down here to whites and blacks. Option or Alt click on the white slider, drag it, and just a couple little specks up here in the clouds. And the black point, we already have a good black point down here. Overall white balance, what would you do? I'd probably come in here and I think I would warm the overall photo. Maybe I'd just a hair on the red side, maybe pull back just a little bit there. Okay, but that's going to go in there, and that's our basic toning settings. All right, and then again, you can always come in here and adjust exposure after the fact. But again, remember, exposure really is, it's like the sledgehammer. Keep on going here. Let's look at a photo like this. So, almost the same scenario as this, but you can see they were backlit, and the camera really pulled back on the exposure on this one, just having it in aperture priority mode. So they look dark. Well, this is a good example where I didn't want to use shadows here. This is a good example. Would I want to do exposure? Not really, because look what exposure's doing. Exposure's just killing the background over here. So I'm not sure I would want to use exposure, so I would come down and I can use shadows. And that's going to help with those backlit photos where it makes them a little bit brighter. I might come in with a little bit of exposure, a little bit of shadows, pull back, look at the highlights. See that in the background there? See how it starts to bring some more detail back in? Again, whites, get ourselves a good white point here. Blacks, get ourselves a good black point. Okay, and now you can see what a difference it makes. If you want to see a before and after, a little shortcut for you here is hold down the backslash key. Press backslash, it shows you before. You can press the backslash key again, and it'll show you the after version. So backslash before, backslash after. We can go look at this one. Before, after, not big change there. Go look at this one. Before, after, very, very big change there. I might even pull back a little on the shadows. I don't think they need to be that bright. And even add some contrast to it. So you kind of get the idea on what these toning settings can do. There's a lot of different combinations to them. My suggestion is I kind of start at the top, start with white balance, work my way down. It's not to say that when I'm done doing the toning settings, I might not come back up and tweak the exposure a little bit or tweak the white balance, but it's for the most part, it's a top-down approach. Here's a quick tip for you on highlights and just how far can you go with highlights inside of Lightroom. So I think it's important to know some of the boundaries of what we can do here inside the Develop module. So take a look at this. This was a photo that I took up in the Northeast, fall color, mid-October, cloudy day, but pretty late in the morning, probably 10, 11 o'clock. So it's pretty bright out. I didn't have a neutral density filter, so I was able to get a little bit of motion in the water, but it's still kind of choppy. All right, it doesn't have that smooth, silky look that I really would hope that I could get from something like this. And I didn't have a neutral density filter to slow down my shutter speed. So here's what I did. I overexposed the photo. I kept my f-stop was locked down at f16. All right, and I went as high as my lens would go to try to slow down the shutter speed. And I still couldn't get a slow enough shutter speed to get that water silky. So what I did is I overexposed the photo by 1 stop, then by 2, then by 3. And this is what I got. And you would never, ever walk away from a photo shoot thinking, I nailed it when you have this photo, right? Look at the clipping warnings, all right? There's clipping all over the place. Well, here's what you can do and something to consider. There's a ton of information in the highlights in your photos, a ton. With the shadows, you run the risk of when you open up the shadows and you move that shadow slider, sometimes it gets noisy. So you can't underexpose a photo. But when you overexpose a photo, you can pull back a lot of information. So just check out the exposure slider on this photo. Look at that. Look at how far back I was able to pull back, and I've reduced and I've gotten rid of all of those clipped highlights. Now look at the water, compare it to that. There's kind of choppy, nice, smooth, silky water. That's what we like when we're taking pictures of water. We don't want it to be frozen in time. We want it to look like it's smooth and it's flowing and it's got that silky look. So I'm able to pull that back with my exposure slider. I can even come in here and even add the highlight slider in here to really fine tune it if I need to. So keep that in mind as you're shooting, to know the boundaries of what we can do after the fact inside the develop module of Lightroom. There's a ton of information in our photos when it comes to the highlights, and we'll have a lot of luck when it comes to pulling back those highlights after the fact using the sliders here inside of Lightroom. Let's talk about that clarity slider that we have inside of the basic panel. It's right down here toward the bottom in the section called presence. So clarity is essentially, it's an added amount of detail. It's contrast. If you want to know the technical things behind clarity, it's contrast, but it's mid-tone contrast. What do I mean by that? Our contrast slider here is going to make the darks darker and the brights brighter, the highlights brighter and the darks darker. That's what the contrast slider does. All right, as I move this, if you think of the histogram, here's your bright parts, here's your dark parts, makes those darker, makes these brighter. Your clarity slider works on everything in between, and it adds a little bit of contrast into those areas. So it tends to work great on photos that have lots of details. Landscape photos, anything with clouds in it, you're going to see a really nice effect from clarity. It almost looks like sharpening, but it's really just adding contrast to a lot of these areas that the contrast slider doesn't get into. So it works great on photos like this. Clarity is going to work great on a photo like this, right? A lot of detail to it, and it just kind of adds a little bit of drama. All right. You want to know where clarity is not going to work good? Clarity is not going to work good on a photo like this. See what it does to the people? It just kind of gives a harsh look to it. It enhances skin texture on the face, which we typically don't want. It enhances wrinkles. It's not a very pleasing effect on portraits, unless it maybe were like a football player or a soccer player or something like that, and you want to add that grit to it. But in most cases, you don't want to on a portrait. The other thing you got to watch out for clarity is areas that should be out of focus, areas that, from using a very low f-stop. This was f2.8. So obviously we want the background to be blurred here. All right. Clarity tends to harshen those areas, and it tends to look really, really bad. So you got to be careful with clarity on that too. But again, here's another portrait. See, just not a really nice effect. But if I jump over to something like this, clarity really works for it. So just keep that in mind. Landscapes, anything with details, anything with texture, clarity works really good for. But any photos, mostly portraits, anything that you want it to be soft and not have so much of a harsh type of an edgy feel to it, you're going to want to keep your clarity slider down. We've got two ways to enhance or kind of improve the color inside your photo. Not necessarily adjust the color. That's more in the realm of your white balance settings. But I mean kind of enhance, saturate, kind of pump a little bit more color into parts of your photo here. So we've got vibrance and saturation. The difference here is vibrance is primarily going to attack non-skin colors. All right, so it works really good on portraits. Here's a great example where we have greens and we have some peaches and reds, and there's some blue back here somewhere because this is water and everything. Well, if I increase the vibrance slider, watch what happens. I'm just going to kind of move it back and forth. So bring it down to 0, bring it back up, down to 0, back up. All right, look at her shirt. Look down here. You could see the difference, right? Look at the grass over here. So you could see the difference there too. And you can even see some blue in the background. Now, does it affect their skin tone? If I get up toward 100, yeah, a little bit. You're going to see it starts to add a little bit more color there. And in fact, in this example, I don't mind it as much. Not quite at 100, but I would pull it back a little bit. So I don't mind it quite as much. But vibrance is really good at attacking non-skin colors in the photo. So your blues and your greens and some of your yellows and everything, once you get into the reds, it can't distinguish between skin and a red shirt. So you have to be a little bit careful of going too high with it. But it's really good at working with those areas. It tends to improve the colors that need it. Saturation, on the other hand, saturation just blasts color saturation into every part of the photo. And you can get into trouble pretty quick with saturation because it almost looks like the sunburn slider, right? People start to get radioactive with it. So you have to be careful there. That said, Saturation, I don't mind saturation. You hear a lot of people down on saturation. I don't mind it on a photo like this, where I want to enhance all the colors. All right, you can see the difference here. If I just crank up vibrance, it kind of just moves the blues. But in this one, I can kind of crank up and get some more pink in the sky and some of these yellows and everything. I can enhance those colors. So I'm okay with saturation on landscape photos, outdoor photos, photos really without people in them. All right, here's another example here. I can just do vibrance, and vibrance is going to mostly pump color into the blues and the greens here, some of the yellow, but not quite as much, right? Where saturation is going to start to push color into everything. All right, saturation doesn't pick and choose between the colors. It just starts pushing into everything. So just keep that in mind. If you're working on photos with people in them, chances are vibrance is going to be your best way if you want to saturate colors a little bit more. But if you're working on outdoor photos, landscape photos, sports photos, travel photos, anything like that, give the saturation slider a try and just see if it's able to get a little bit more color into everything without making other areas look fake. Well, at some point you're going to want to see a before and after of your photo, and I kind of showed you one of the keyboard shortcuts we can use for this, which was the backslash key. All right, just hit the backslash key and that'll show you your before photo right on top of your after photo. So basically it swaps between the two. So hit backslash again to see your after. So that's before, that's after. However, if you want to see them side by side, you can come down here right below the photo in this little toolbar. By the way, if you don't see this toolbar, you might have hidden it accidentally or on purpose. Just press the letter T. All right, so there's T hides it, T shows it. So here's a little icon. You can see it's got two little Y looking things right next to it. Just click on that. That's going to show you before and after side by side. And you can even click in here and zoom in and you can see both. All right, kind of keeps them both locked, I guess is what I'm trying to say here. So that wherever you zoom in on one, you zoom in on the other one. And then if you click on it again, it shows you before and after split view. Which is kind of neat, you kind of zoom in here and you can see what it looks like in a split view. Honestly, I mean, it looks cool, but I never really see anybody use it. If you click on it again, you'll see your before and after top to bottom, not side by side. So this might work better for a horizontal photo or a wide photo where the side by side probably works better for a tall photo. And if you click on it again, you see the top to bottom split view. Click on it one more time, that takes you back to your before and after side by side. If you want to exit before and after view altogether, all you have to do is just hit that icon to the left and that takes you back to your regular view. But if it's me, honestly, I'm going to use the backslash key. That's my favorite way to do it. It's a very quick way to do it. I just check backslash key before, backslash key after, everything looks good. I don't have to click any buttons. I don't have to change my view or anything like that. All right, so here's the scenario. We have a bunch of photos that were all taken kind of in the same lighting conditions. If you take a look through all these different photos, you can see here they all, same pose, just cropped in, maybe tilted a little bit, maybe they changed their pose a little bit, maybe I zoomed in a little bit. So same overall type of lighting condition, same overall location. And what's going to happen is we're going to go in here and we're going to edit a photo. So maybe I go in and I'll kind of tweak the exposure a little bit, and I would warm the photo, pull back on some of the highlights here, open up the shadows a little bit, hold down our Option or Alt key, work on the whites and the blacks. All right, a little bit of vibrance, tiny bit of clarity. So we'd go down and we do our develop settings. All right, we haven't talked about this yet, but under the effects panel is a vignette. So I might even come in here and add a little bit of a vignette to the photo. So if I hit the backslash key, that's before, that's after. Well, I've made changes to this photo here, and I'd love to take the changes to this photo and just make them all to the other photos so that I don't have to go through and I don't have to edit each and every photo, that I can just copy the changes. So Lightroom's got a couple of different ways for us to do this. All right, so we'll kind of go through and we'll talk about each one. One way to do it would be, I've made the changes to this photo and then I realize that I'd love to go back in here and make it to all these photos. So what I can do is shift click down here in the film strip, and I can select all the photos that I want to change. Once you have multiple photos selected, you're going to see the button down here changes to sync. So if I click on synchronize, it's going to open up a dialog box for me. I always hit check none, and then I tell it, what do I want to synchronize? Well, I did white balance, basic tone, clarity, vibrance, and some of that post-crop vignetting here. So I'd like to sync all these different things. A good point to make though is here, let's cancel out of this. Let's say on this photo here, let's say I went in and I cropped it a little bit too. Okay, so I cropped this photo. Again, I select all the other photos, I hit sync, and I tell it what I want to sync here. I'm going to leave crop turned off. Otherwise, it's going to go through all these photos and crop them exactly the same. And that might not work because I probably changed position a little bit. They probably changed position a little bit. So you just synchronize the things that you want to synchronize across all these photos. So let's do this. I'm going to hit the synchronize button. You just watch the thumbnails down here in the film strip because that's where the changes are going to happen. So I'll hit synchronize. You see how all the thumbnails down there just changed? So it went through and it copied those settings to all the photos. Now, it copied it setting for setting. So whatever the exposure was for this photo here, plus 0.3, is going to be the same exact exposure setting for this. There's nothing saying you can't come in after the fact and change it a little bit though. So you're free to do that. But it is a good starting place. It is a good way to kind of get photos that were all taken in a similar location to sync up with each other. Now, that's one way to do it. Another thing that you could do is if you have the foresight ahead of time to know that you're looking at these photos and you think, well, hey, these all look the same. I want them to make sure they all have the same settings. You could select all the photos first, and then you'll see the sync button, but it's got a little toggle switch right next to it. See that little switch? If you click on that switch, it goes into auto sync. And so what auto sync does means it means every slider I change, it's going to change all of them. So watch what happens here. I'll change the exposure. See how it changes all of them? So it's moving every single photo. If I change them to black and white, they all get changed to black and white. Go back to color, they all go back to color. All right, so that's a good way if you have the foresight and you know ahead of time that you want all these things to look the same. That's how you can do it. Now, along the same lines, let's go in here and let me go to the next photo here, and I'm going to hit the reset button. So this is going to reset everything back to normal, all right? And I'll go back over here. So here we've made changes. I'm working on the photo, doing white balance, cropping, whatever it happens to be. I go to the next photo. If I want to make the next photo look exactly like the previous photo, I just hit the previous button down here. And it does exactly the same settings. All right, setting for setting. You don't get a choice. It's going to make the develop settings, including crop, including whatever. It's going to make them exactly the same as the previous photo. I got to tell you, I use that a lot. I use that probably more than I use the sync thing that I just showed you here. All right, I tend to use the previous. I'll work on a photo. I'll go to the next photo and be like, you know what? That's pretty close to what the last photo was. I hit previous. Go to the next photo, hit previous. Even if maybe I want to change a few things, it still gets me pretty close without having to go through the same tweaks that I did for each photo. So I would go as far as saying when you're in the develop module, this button down here is probably one of the most powerful buttons that we have inside of the develop module. All right. And then just to show you one other thing that we can do, let's say as an example, I'm working on this photo. I could go up to the settings menu here and I can choose copy settings. It's almost like the sync dialog, right? I tell it what I want to copy, and then I can go through here, and as I come up onto a different photo, then I can just go over here to settings and hit paste settings. By the way, in the develop module, there's a copy paste button down here. So you could use those buttons. They do the same exact thing. So I'll hit paste, and you can see it pasted those settings there. And then of course, like everything in Lightroom, there are keyboard shortcuts. So if you want to, Shift Command V or Shift Control V or C for copy. So you can use those keyboard shortcuts if that's something that you're going to use all the time too, which I do use copy a lot too, probably more than I do sync as well. So previous is probably the big one. And then what I'll do is I'll copy the settings from one photo. And if I'm ever working on another photo and I think, hey, I know I have those settings copied, I'll go ahead and paste them in. It might not be the finishing point, but a lot of times it just saves me the time from having to do the same edits over and over again, and it gets me pretty close. Then I'll just come in here and just maybe tweak the sliders just a little bit. I always tell people that the tone curve is kind of the setting that's inside Lightroom for people that really that used Photoshop for a while and really liked curves inside of Photoshop. And so I think the first thing to understand about just about everything below the basic panel is that this stuff is kind of like icing on the cake. Your basic panel is really where all the magic happens. Okay. All this other stuff is just extra stuff. Sometimes you'll use it, sometimes you won't. All right. It just depends on the photo. You're going to use the basic stuff, the basic panel for every photo, but all this stuff is extra. The tone curve. So here's where it's interesting, because if you go to the basic panel, you'll see that there's a contrast slider. If you tweak the whites and blacks, you're also kind of in a way working on the contrast in the photo. And then when you come over here to the tone curve, well, the tone curve is really there for contrast. So it's like, you know, if you're going to hear me say, yeah, I can add contrast with black and whites, and I can add contrast with the contrast slider, and I can add contrast with the tone curve, you're like, how many different ways are there to add contrast here? And that's exactly it. There are several. Lightroom was built, like, you know, of course, when Adobe built software, they're not just going to go out to one person and say, hey, what do you want in this software? Because if they did and they came to me, I'd say, hey guys, I'm cool with contrast. That just a slider works for me. But obviously they're going to go to other people, and other people are going to say, oh no, I need curves from Photoshop. I use curves for this and this and this, because everybody's got a different workflow. So I at least want to show you what the tone curve is. It's not something I use a whole lot, but I do want to show you what it is. So the first thing to kind of understand about the tone curve is that there's two ways that you can use it. There's this little icon at the bottom, and this kind of dictates how you're going to be working with the tone curve. So if you see this view, and you go and you click on your tone curve, and you can move a point anywhere and drag it up and down and up and down. All right, if you see that view, then you're kind of on the point curve way. If you click this way, you're on the almost guided type of a curve way, where you're not going to be able to just click and drag anywhere you want. You're restricted. You can see that light gray area. I'm restricted. Okay, and then I get these sliders below the tone curve that restrict me. So they basically do the same thing. I could click on the curve and I can move it, or I can move the slider. They do exactly the same thing. But that's to me, this isn't where you're going to go if you're going to use the tone curve. There's no reason that if you're into curves, then you're probably into tweaking your curves a little bit. So you're going to click this icon, go back to essentially do whatever you want mode, which is what this is. And the way most people use the curve is you're going to kind of come over here, and the right hand side works your highlights, the left hand side works your shadows. You can look at the histogram over here. All right, and a lot of people will just kind of bump up the highlights a little bit and then kind of pull down the shadows a little bit. All right, and then you can kind of see, and you can also control, you know, this is midtones. Do you want to pull down, you know, basically from whatever point I click and below, I'm pulling those values down. So here I'm taking my midtones and everything else down. When I do it down here, I'm kind of leaving the midtones alone. I'm saying, hey, just take the really dark stuff and make that a little bit darker. Don't forget, every panel in the develop module has a toggle switch. These little toggle switches here. So every panel has them. I'll zoom in for you here. You can see it. So that little toggle switch right there. When you click that toggle switch, it will toggle that panel, just that panel, on and off. It's like a before and after of the panel. We did before and afters down here, or with the backslash key, right? But this just toggles the panel. So that's before, that's after. Just a little bit more punch, a little bit more contrast. You can kind of see it before and after. Okay, that's mostly what people do with the tone curve, though. If you ever want to reset it, just right click right inside of here and choose flatten curve, and it'll reset your curve back to all its zero values. There's some presets at the bottom, because essentially what we did, this is an S curve. This is your typical S curve. It's shaped almost in an S. So if you've got a flat curve, you can go linear, you can go medium contrast, which almost creates the S curve for you, or you can go strong contrast, which creates a deeper S curve for you over here. And again, just come back here, go back to linear to reset everything. If you want, you can click on this little guy right to the top left. It's called the Target Adjustment Tool. And what that'll do is if you're not sure what area you want to tweak, what area you want to make brighter or darker, you can move this tool. Like let's say I want to go over here and I want to pull this area down. You'll see how the curve moves for me. Okay, so it's automatically put a point on the curve. You can see it put it right up here. It's put a point on the curve. Let's say this area over here, maybe I want to pull it up a little bit. All right, and it's automatically put a point there. So that's what the target adjustment tool is it keeps you from having to figure out what parts of the photo you want to modify. It'll go in there and do it for you. Again, it's not doing anything different than that you could have done yourself by clicking on a point on the curve. It's just a more automatic way to do it. All right, let's go and flatten the curve. The last thing would be for all of you curve lovers from Photoshop. If you were like way into curves in Photoshop, one of the things that you could do is you could adjust the curve for each channel. You can also do that inside of Lightroom. So you can do the RGB composite, which is what most people would keep it on, but you can also go into the red channel or the green channel or the blue channel. Why would you do that? Again, you loved curves in Photoshop. You got really techie and geeky into curves. This is color correction and color adjustment. To me, if I go to the blue curve, what happens here? If I drag it up, I make the photo more blue. If I drag it down, I make it more yellow. Well, for me, it's just easier to come do that with white balance. That's where I'm going to do my color adjustments to the photo rather than come over here to the color, to the tone curve and to do it based on whatever channel here. But again, if you really love curves in Photoshop, you'll be happy to know they're pretty much the same exact curve that you have right here inside of Lightroom 2. Here's another one of those little random tip videos for you. I called it Develop Module Shortcuts and Things That Everybody Should Know. So these are like essentials that I think you're going to use all the time. First one, do this right now. All right, just trust me on this one. Do it right now. So here's the deal. You've got all these panels over here in the Develop module. You know what's going to happen? You're going to do something in the Basic panel, and then you'll do something in the Tone curve, and then you'll do something in HSL, and maybe down here under Effects. Eventually, once you open up all these panels, do you know what you spend your entire day doing? You spend your entire day scrolling up and down and up and down. You're going to be scrolling to get to all your panels, and it gets to be a pain in the neck. If you right click anywhere in a dark gray area here in the panel, don't right click on the panel because that doesn't do, or maybe, you know what, I think they changed this in Lightroom 5 because it didn't do it in Lightroom 4, but I think now if you right click anywhere, forget what I just said. Okay, let's go back. Right click anywhere. All right, you're going to see something called solo mode. So go ahead and turn solo mode on. Just click on it. See what it did here? It collapsed all the panels. So watch what happens. I open up the Basic panel, and then if I scroll down here and I want to go to the Effects panel, when I click on it, it took me to the Effects panel, but look at what happened. The Basic panel is now closed. If I click to the Tone Curve panel, the Effects panel is now closed. So it just keeps you with one panel open at a time rather than every panel staying open and you having to scroll up and down to find it. All right, so if I go to the Basic panel, Tone Curve just closed, go back down here to Detail, everything closed. Pretty cool. Another thing, if you right click, you can turn off panels that you just simply don't use. All right, so if you just figure I never use the camera calibration panel, turn it off. If you never use Tone Curve, turn it off. You can turn it off, and that way it won't even show up in this list for you have to scroll up and down to. Don't forget, I've kind of mentioned this already, but every panel, let's make a quick change here. Every panel has a little toggle switch that will toggle before and after, and it's just the before and after of that specific panel. All right. Each panel is also numbered. So think of it this way. If I press Command 1, and that'd be Control 1 on a PC, that opens up the first panel, Basic. 2 for Tone Curve, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So 7 was Effects. So if I press Command 7, it'll take me right to the Effects panel. If I press Command 1, it takes me right to the Basic panel. If I press Command 6, it takes me down to Lens Corrections. Command 8, Camera Calibration. You get the idea here. All right, and that can be a really fast way of working, especially if you're like me, where you're really using just a few panels. You know, the Basic, the Effects panel, sometimes HSL, and that's the bulk of what I use inside of Lightroom. That becomes a really quick way to move around because no matter what, I know if I press Command 1, I go to that very first panel. All right. A couple other things here just to finish things up. If you want to reset a slider to 0, you don't have to go over here and try to, painstakingly get that slider perfectly at 0, and then your mouse moves just a little bit. If you want to reset a slider to 0, just double click the name of the slider, and that resets it to 0. Just like that. You could also double click the slider, but to me that's less of a target. You got to be pretty accurate to get right onto that slider. But no matter where the slider's at, just double click the name, it resets it to 0. You'll see things like tone. You'll see little letters at the top of things. So let's say I move the white balance settings. If I want to reset them back to their defaults, I don't have to click on each slider like this. Instead, I can just double click on white balance and it'll reset everything that way. All right. Same thing. Move all the tone settings, double click on the word tone. It resets all the sliders that represent this whole tone section. So you don't have to go through each one of them and double click to reset. You can just double click the one tone section. Same thing under presence, same thing for all the other sliders that you'll see down there. So it works throughout the develop module. And that's another key one. Rather than trying to get it back to 0 here, just double click the name and everything's reset automatically for you. All right, so those are what I consider, folks, what I consider to be some develop module keyboard shortcuts that I think are essential, things that just help you move through the develop module much more quickly, and will help your overall experience in Lightroom a lot too. If you go down to the HSL color / B&W or black and white section, you can control individual colors. We'll talk about black and white in another video, but HSL and color basically do the same thing. They're gonna be separated out into 3 sections, and I always use the HSL section here. Color does the same thing. It just makes it a little bit, you're clicking on the color you want to edit, then you edit the hue, saturation, or luminance, where HSL just breaks it out into hue, saturation, and luminance, and then the colors or sliders below. So 2 different ways of doing the same thing. Personally, I prefer the HSL. So you go to hue. What does hue do? It changes the color. So if I go to the blues and I drag the hue, you'll see I'll make the blues more greenish, teal-like by going to the left, and more purple by going to the right. All right, and it even gives you can even look at the slider and kind of tell what's going to happen. If I go to the greens, same thing. See, I'm adjusting just the greens in the photo. If I go to the yellows, probably some of the greens in there too. Oranges, where do we have orange? Probably some areas in the sky. So I can change those colors. And probably not a whole lot of reds in this photo, but if the photo did have reds in it, like maybe a photo like this, then you can see here how I can adjust the reds in the photo. So that's our hue. Same thing goes for saturation. So we go to the saturation slider. If I want to saturate the blues a little bit, I can saturate those. If I wanted to desaturate the yellows, I can pull some yellow out, desaturate the green. It essentially works exactly. It's kind of like hue and saturation inside of Photoshop, but over here in Lightroom. So you can work on each color. And then luminance works on the brightness or darkness of the color. So if you want to make the blues deeper blue, like a darker blue, almost like if you used a polarizer on it, then you can pull those blues back and they get darker, or you can make them brighter. Same thing, we'll go over here to greens, can make my greens brighter, pull the yellows in there too, make the yellows brighter, make the oranges a little bit darker. So just hue changes the color, saturation changes the overall saturation of the color, and luminance changes the, I guess you can call it the brightness or darkness of that color. Saturation is kind of like intensity, luminance is like the brightness or darkness. Just like the tone curve, it's got this little target adjustment tool. So if you're not sure, all you got to do is click on the target adjustment tool. Here, let's go ahead and let's reset. Let's reset our sliders. By the way, you can just double click the word luminance. It'll reset them all. Same thing, go to saturation, double click the word saturation, resets them all. So if you're not sure, if you're looking at this and you're like, well, it's kind of green and there's some yellows in there too, just click over with the target adjustment tool. And if you look, see how it's moving the green and the aqua slider in this example? If I click over here, see how it's moving the green and the yellow slider? So it's actually telling me that, hey, there's more than one color that you're hovering over. If I go to the blues, see how it's moving blue and aqua at the same time, and it moves them a little bit, like it moves the blue one faster than it moves the aqua. So it knows the concentration of each color that you happen to be hovering over. So that'll be that's a nice little time saver, that if you're just flat out not sure which color is best to click on here, just use this little target adjustment and drag it up and down, and it'll take care of it for you. Well, Lightroom has a history panel. So a couple of things that about what's going on inside of Lightroom and how it's managing all these changes that we make to it. First thing you'll notice is if you go to the history panel in the develop module, you're going to see a history of every single thing that you have done to this photo. All right, every time you've moved a slider. It looks like a lot here because it's a demo file for me, so I move sliders a lot. But you'll see a history of every single thing that you've done to your photo, and you can step back at any point in time. The cool thing that we have inside of Lightroom is that this history never goes away. All right. If you were to be working in Photoshop, Photoshop has a history panel too, but it goes away. As soon as you close that image, your history is gone. And that's why we use things like layers and layer masks and adjustment layers and all these things in Photoshop, so that we give ourselves, even when we close our document, when we open it back up, we can always change it. But in Lightroom, this history is always saved. You'd have to click that X little icon up here to actually clear the history. It's always saved. When I close Lightroom, when I open it back up, this history panel for this photo is going to look exactly the same. And that's because Lightroom's keeping all of this stuff in its little internal catalog. We talked about the catalog back in the first part of the in-depth classes, and what the catalog was and how it holds all the stuff that we do to our photos. Well, this is exactly the information it's holding. It's not actually writing it to the file. Even if you're shooting in RAW, even if you change this to DNG, it's not actually writing all this information to the actual images. It's only going to write it to the Lightroom catalog. By the way, if you do use DNG, if you go to your Lightroom catalog settings, and I mentioned this way back in the whole library catalog part of the in-depth class, but if you go to your catalog settings, you can tell it to automatically write changes into an XMP file if you're shooting in RAW, or if you change and convert to DNG, to automatically write those changes to the DNG. By default, it does not, because it takes extra time and it slows Lightroom down. So they keep that checkbox off. But just understand that if you want to, you can turn it on and it'll make little sidecar XMP files for you, or it'll write it directly to the DNG. Anyway, though, back over here to history. So moral of this story is, nothing that you're doing here, nothing that you do here in Lightroom is permanent. It is always an undo away, which, by the way, the keyboard shortcut for undo is the universal keyboard shortcut for undo on all programs all across the world, everywhere. You know, I say all across the world, I'm sure that it's not somewhere, but at least in America, all of your keyboard shortcuts are all going to be undo, Command Z on the Mac, Control Z on the PC, and that is pretty much the universal for just about all software that's out there, not just Adobe software. So you're just an undo away from getting back. Now here's the other key thing. Because nothing done in Lightroom is destructive to the photo, if you ever just want to get back to your original photo, just hit reset. That's it. Just hit the reset button. It resets every single thing that you can do in the develop module into Lightroom. It resets it all to its 0 setting. So your original is always here. Even though I can go in and I can edit and I can do all kinds of things to it, your original photo is never actually touched. Whether it's a JPEG, whether it's a RAW, whether it's a TIFF file, no matter what it is, it's never actually modified. Lightroom's just kind of making all these changes. Again, if we were kind of refer back to the in-depth part of the catalogs and libraries and organizing, we talked about, once I make my changes to the photo and I've done something to it, I can go File, Export. I can save it as a JPEG. That bakes the changes into that copy of that JPEG. But on my original here, that's inside of Lightroom, is never ever changed. No matter what I do, I can always rechange it. I can always go back to the original, or I can hit reset and I'm right back to the photo as if I never ever touched it. There's another cool feature in the develop module right near the history panel called snapshots. So let me show you what a snapshot is for. It's kind of It's kind of your way around. It helps you experiment. I guess that's probably one of the best ways that you can put it. So here's an example. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to develop this photo. I'll maybe bump up the exposure, make it a little bit warmer, add some contrast to it, pull back a little bit on the highlights. Not really too much shadows to worry about. Adjust the whites and blacks here. And of course, finish it up with a nice little vignette. And we'll hit the backslash key so you can see that's before, that's after. So I've made some changes to the photo. Well, at this point, let's say I want to try maybe converting it to a black and white and even adding a little bit of a tint to it or something like that. But I know that I kind of like the point that I'm at now, and I might want to get back to this point without having to come to the history panel and find out where I was. So that's what snapshots are for. You take a snapshot of the photo at that point in time. So I go to my snapshots panel, click that little plus icon. You can give it a descriptive name or just leave it as a time. So his name was Dean, so I'll just call it Dean color version and hit create. And then I can go in and we'll go to, let's say, the black and white conversion here. And I can come in here and start to tweak things a little bit, maybe even go down to split toning, add a little bit of a color tint to it or something like that. And then I can create another snapshot and I can call it Dean Tinted. B&W, black and white, and hit create. And so what this does is now I have two snapshots here. They're basically 2 points in time. So if I ever decided, I've gone down this route and I'm like, I'm not crazy about it, and I don't want to go back in history and figure out where in that point that I was, what I would do is just come to the snapshot, just click on Dean color version, and it's going to take me right back to that point in time when I created a snapshot. Okay, so it's a snapshot of whatever your develop module settings are for this particular photo at that point in time. Just helps you experiment a little bit because you can go down a different path when you're working on the photo without necessarily losing that if you decide you want to come back to a certain point where you were at. Part of the section in the hue, saturation, and color area inside the develop module also has a black and white section. So if you wanted to convert your photos to a black and white, this is where you would do it. You'll notice if you go up here to the basic panel, you could do a quick black and white conversion. It's just going to do a default black and white conversion just by clicking on black and white. And essentially what it does is it turns on this black and white panel down here. So it's the same thing. If you're going to come up here to the basic panel and you're going to change from color to black and white, it's essentially like coming down here and turning on the black and white panel. All right. By the way, keyboard shortcut for you, a little tip, is if you're looking at the color photo and you want to see just a very quick glance at what it looks like as a black and white, just hit the letter V. V is in Victor. Convert your photo to black and white, and you can take a look at it and say, maybe I like it, maybe I don't. Press V again, and it'll take you right back. All right, so let's jump down to that black and white panel. And essentially, it's a lot like the hue, saturation, and luminance, except you don't have hue and you don't have saturation. Pretty much all you have is luminance. All right, that's essentially what your black and white panel is going to be. So it's just going to control how dark or bright certain colors in the photo are. So for example, there are some blues in the sky. I can control how dark or how bright those blues are. It's a canyon. Early morning, there's probably lots of oranges. There's probably lots of reds. There's probably lots of yellows inside of there in the sky. So now I'm controlling just how bright and just how dark some of those areas are inside of here. So you can make them a little bit brighter if you need to. Maybe make the sky a little bit darker, just like that. If you're not sure, if you're just ever not sure what color to click over, we talked about this with hue, saturation, and luminance. Just click on your little target adjustment tool and just come over here and just click and drag. Drag up to make that area brighter, drag down to make it darker. And that's a great example. So I'd probably never really thought that the hue over here, the color is very purplish because it was early morning and just the colors on the canyon, the sunlight's not hitting it. So it has a very purplish type of color. So that's actually a great example because I don't know that I ever would have dragged the purple and the blue sliders to increase this area of the canyons that we have over here. All right, so that is your black and white conversion that exists inside of Lightroom. Once you make these adjustments here, if you ever wanted to get back to the color version, all you got to do is just click back over here to HSL, and it'll hide all your black and white changes and put you right back to your color photo. While we're on the topic of creative settings, another creative setting that I consider at least is going to be the split toning panel. So, we talked about the basics, about, the basic panel and even some tone curve in HSL. But I think once we get down into black and white, we're a little bit more creative. It's not something you're going to do to every photo. Same thing with split toning. It's not something you're going to do to every photo. Personally, split toning is something that I would do to a black and white photo first. You can essentially tint the shadows and the highlights in the photo here, just with different color saturations. The thing is you can get some retro style effects. Like if you go blue and maybe some yellow goldenish colors here, you get a little bit of that retro type of a look to it. If you go, maybe even magenta, maybe not so much magenta. So if you start to go into that direction, again, you get more of a retro style to the photo, almost a cross-process type of a look. But honestly, to me, it's really the kind of thing that you would convert the photo to a black and white first, kind of, get everything looking the way you want there. Then you go to split toning. And honestly, the way that I use split toning, because if you really break it down, what's happening here is you've got a choice between the highlights and a choice between the shadows. Which color do you want to tint each one of those? There's a little swatch next to it. You can click on that little color picker, and up and down is the saturation of the color. Side to side is which color it becomes. And all that is just a different way of doing the same thing here. You could do it on the little color picker there, or you can do it with the sliders, but they both do the same thing. Honestly, for me, I typically leave the highlights alone unless I want one of those specialized color, retro type of styles, and I'm going to keep the photo as a color photo. If I just want to tint it, just give it that almost classic type of a look, I'm really just going to come down here to the shadows. Leave the highlights alone because it starts to get a little bit weird. Come down here to the shadows, bring it over almost to the goldenish yellow type of a color, and then increase your saturation. And if you click that little toggle switch, you'll see that's before, and then that's after. So we've just tinted it, and of course you can tint it any color that you want. Blue, brown, red, gold, whatever color it is. Just adjust that hue slider here, and then adjust the saturation slider. Typically, I'm not going to crank it way up. We're going to want to keep it low, just to give it a hint of color, right? All the way back, that's total black and white, but if you increase it here to 10, 12, 15%, right around there, you just give it a nice little hint of color. And again, if you're looking for a more creative setting, this isn't something you do to every photo, but if you're looking for something a little bit more creative, then you come down here to the split toning, and that's where you can kind of start to adjust some of the color toning of your photos. The effects panel is pretty cool for some finishing touches, and honestly, just mostly the vignetting section of it. But you do have a couple of effects that you can apply to your photos, one being vignetting, the other one being grain. So let's go ahead and work on this photo. And what would we do here? I'd probably convert this to a black and white, maybe adjust a couple of the sliders here just to make things a little bit brighter. All right. Right there. And then come down here to split toning. Maybe add just a little bit of a color tint to it. And then I'm going to go down to effects. And this is where we kind of finish things off. One of the things that I add to a lot of my photos is a vignette. Come over here, it just darkens the edges. And always find it kind of helps draw people into the photo a little bit more. The amount slider is the amount of darkening. You can go dark or you can go bright with it too. And by the way, nothing says 1993 like a white vignette. Sorry, just had to get it in there. But anyway, so you come over here. We're probably going to want to darken the edges here. So it just kind of darkens it a little bit. The midpoint is how far in toward the center it goes. So way in, or it keeps it way out toward the sides here. The roundness is whether it's going to be a circle or whether it's going to be more of a rectangle. I'm going to crank it up just so you can see it a little bit better. So to the left gives you that little like rounded rectangle. Over here means it's more of a circle. All right, I kind of like the rectangle look. And then feathers, how harsh is the transition between the dark and what's not darkened? Okay, so you bring it all the way over to the left. It's a very, very harsh transition. Bring it all the way to the right. It's a very soft transition. Okay, and we're going to pull that back because it should not be quite that high. There we go. All right, now if you want to add green, we'll come in here, we'll zoom in, I'll make it a little bit easier for you to see. We can go down here, add the amount slider here, and you can see it just adds a grainy look to your photo. So There's not too much more to it. The size setting makes the grain big or makes the grain smaller. And the or the roughness setting is almost kind of like a blur. To the left, it's like little sharp pieces of grain. And to the right, it looks like blurry green, if you will. I usually find that setting is best. Right in the middle here, the size setting, usually somewhere right around 25–30% over here, and then you just figure out how much of that graininess do you want to add to your photo here. Okay, so as you're about to finish off, you're about done with the photo, you got a couple finishing effects here. Most of the one I think that you'll find you'll use would be the post-crop vignetting. Don't mistake that with the manual section inside of lens correction, which is lens vignetting. Don't mistake post-crop vignetting with lens vignetting. All right, this is to fix vignetting, where the effects panel, the post-crop vignetting, is there to enhance or just to add a finishing effect to a photo. So up until this point, we've been adding these effects to these photos. We've been doing all the changes and everything and whatnot to our photos. One of the questions that I hear quite a bit is, what do I do if I want different versions of this photo? All right, and we saw the snapshots panel. And we saw that it'll let me take a color version snapshot in time of the photo, and then I can take another snapshot of maybe the photos of black and white, and maybe do some more experimentation. But they're really not meant to be versions. It's just meant to save your editing at certain points in time. But a lot of people want versions. They want to be able to compare a color version and a black and white, and not have to go and physically duplicate the file and create two different physical copies of it. So here's what Lightroom offers. It's something that's really cool. It's called a virtual copy. It's kind of like a fake version of your photo. And here's what I mean. What we'll do here, let me go ahead. I'm going to reset this photo. All right. And I did do some cropping to it, so let's just pull that down a little bit. So here we have our color version. What I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on it, and I'm going to choose create virtual copy. So now if you look down here in the film strip, take a look. It's got my original here, and it's got the virtual copy next to it. How do you know the virtual copy is? It's got a little tiny like page curl icon that's right at the bottom left of it. That means it's a virtual copy. So a virtual copy, for all intents and purposes, is the same as any other photo. You can do whatever you want to it, but it's not a physical copy. Lightroom's kind of just making a little preview version of it for you to be able to play around with, although you still can do all the normal things that you could do to a photo with a virtual copy. So what we can do here is maybe convert it to a black and white, make a couple of adjustments here, and then what I'll do is right click again and choose create virtual copy. And now I'll take this one, I'll go to the split toning panel, and maybe I'll add a tint to it. And come down here to effects, put a little bit of a vignette, maybe even a little bit of grain. And so what I can do is now I've got 3 different versions of my photo. And so this lets me kind of figure out which one do I want to go with. You know, now I can see them all side by side. Remember, if you use what we learned in the library module, I can go over here to the library module. I could select all 3 of these photos. When you have 3 photos that are all very similar to each other and you want to pick the best one, which view do you use? You use the one all the way over here on the right hand side of these 4 icons. It's called survey view. So you click on that and it shows me all of the photos next to each other. And I can say, you know, I'm not crazy about the tinted one, but I do like the black and white one, so let's get rid of that one, and this will be our keeper for that specific pose that we have for that photo. So that's what virtual copies do, is they basically let you experiment with different things that you can do to a photo, but they're different versions, and you can keep them next to each other. When you're done, if you decide you want to delete one, like I'll go ahead and click on this one, all I got to do is hit the delete key, and it goes away. All right, and that's because I'm in a collection. If I went to the actual folder, which, by the way, a little tip for you, if you right click here and you choose go to the folder in the library, it'll take you to that folder here, and you can see there's the original. If I hit delete now when I'm in the folder, it says remove the virtual copy. So I just hit remove. And we learned that back when we talked about collections. We learned that if we delete a photo from a collection, I can hit the delete key, it just goes away, but it still lives in its original folder, and that's exactly the case here when we made our virtual copies. All right, so if you want to do a little bit of experimentation and you want to keep different versions of the photo without necessarily like going to the folder and making a full physical copy, because remember, these virtual copies, They're not physical copies of the photo. If you want to do it that way and save yourself some disk space and save some confusion of having multiple copies of the photo out there, virtual copies are the way to go. A lot of times I'll hear the question, when and where do I sharpen my photos? Well, Lightroom's got a detail panel, all right, and this is where you would take care of your sharpening. But I'll tell you this right up front. It just depends a lot on your workflow too, because for starters, it doesn't matter when you sharpen in Lightroom. So the main thing to remember here is none of the settings we're doing here in Lightroom they don't build on top of each other, where it's better if I do my exposure first and then do my sharpening last. We're always taught to sharpen last and things like that. It doesn't matter in Lightroom because they don't build or they don't stack on top of each other. So whether you sharpen first, whether you sharpen last inside of Lightroom, you don't get any different type of result. So when to use the detail panel in Lightroom? Here's what I tell people. If you're only going to use Lightroom, then do your sharpening here. If you're going to use Photoshop, if you're going to use Elements, if you're going to use a third-party plugin, if you're going to go into ON1's effects plugin or any of the portrait retouching plugins that are out there, any Nik software or Topaz, whatever it happens to be. If you're going to jump into a plugin, chances are a lot of those plugins have sharpening built into them. If you're going to go into Photoshop or Elements, then I'd recommend to do the sharpening there. All right, so that's kind of the rule of thumb here. If you're not going to leave and you're not going to leave Lightroom, then do the sharpening there. But if you're going to go and you're going to jump into another one of those programs, then go ahead and do the sharpening, whatever program you're going to go into. All right, and that, we saw this portrait shoot that I did. Perfect example, right? I've got all these photos from this portrait. Well, I'm not going to take every single one of the proofs that I create and go into Photoshop and edit and retouch these photos. I'm just gonna go in here to the sharpening panel, go down to the detail panel, add some sharpening here, and then should they come back and say, yes, I like this photo, then I'll kind of bring it into Photoshop and work it a little bit better. All right. Anyway, let's get back down here. So first off, to understand sharpening, you got to be zoomed into 100%. So when you're up here looking at a navigator, it's got to say 1:1. Zoom into 100%. It's got an amount slider. The amount slider is the amount of sharpening that gets added. Remember, sharpening basically finds edges, and it kind of adds some contrast to those edges and texture to make it look like it's sharper. The radius setting says, how far outside, once I find an edge, how far outside do you want me to apply the sharpening? You can pretty much leave that like right around 1.3, 1.4. It's almost a formula. Just leave it right there. All right. You don't want to go higher because you start to get some weird little haloing type of effects. Detail. Detail says, how many things do you want me to look for to sharpen? All right, it's different. It is very different from the amount of sharpening. The amount of sharpening is it's like the amount of contrast that gets added to the edges. But before it even gets there, detail says, well, how much do you really want me to look for to sharpen? At a very low setting, only the extreme contrasty edges are going to get any sharpening. And if you hit our toggle switch here, I'll crank up the amount for you. You can see it definitely is doing some sharpening, right? But as I bring the detail slider up, now I see like a lot of stuff is getting sharpened. It's obvious to see it when you start to bring that detail up, but when it's down, it's a little bit harder to see because it's just working on those edges, and that's not a bad thing. That's actually a good thing. I generally am not going to crank my detail setting up that high. It's funny how the amount setting has a little red section over here. To me, almost this whole slider should be red because it gets pretty bad pretty quick. You get a lot of bad texture on things. Now masking. Masking basically, it takes, let's say that this is a good amount of sharpening, right? It's sharpened everything. Here's a before, here's after. It's probably too much, but let's just say for sake of argument that this is the amount of sharpening that we want. Well, if we come up here to the sky, take a look at the sky. Watch what the detail slider did. See how it added this texture up there? Same thing with the amount. It's sharpening the rocks and everything. That's good. But it's also sharpening too much texture up here in the sky. Well, masking says, I'm going to hide the sharpening from kind of the smoother, more surface gradient type of areas like skies or skin. So I increase the masking setting here. You see it go away. Here, watch. Let me crank it. I'll crank it way up. Look at all the texture. We'll increase masking. You see it go away. I'll bring it back. So that's before. That's after. So masking will start to hide it away from those areas. Pretty cool thing about masking in all the sliders here, but really the only place you would use it would be masking, is if you hold down the Option key on Mac, Alt on PC, and you click the masking slider, you can see a little overlay here of what's happening. All right, and bring it all the way over to the left. Everything's white, meaning everything is being sharpened. The more you bring it to the right and you hold down that Option key on Mac, Alt on PC, you start to see whatever turns black, that's where Lightroom is hiding the sharpening from. So what's white, which is the rocks, right? That's still getting sharpened, but everything that's black, it's hiding the sharpening from those areas. And you get a little preview of it right here. If you ever want to zoom into a different part of the photo, you just click that little icon right there, and I can say zoom into that, and it gives you preview over here. What that would be useful for is if I wanted to zoom, remember you got to be zoomed into 100% to see it, but if I want to zoom out and I want to keep it a little bit smaller, but I want to see right here, then I can kind of look in on different parts of the photo while I still look at the whole entire photo over here. So it'll keep this always zoomed into 100%, but you can do anything you want here because you'll be able to track whatever you're sharpening up here. All right, let's go ahead. Let's take a quick look at a portrait just to show you an example here. All right, so we'll sharpen a portrait. I'm going to go in here. I'm going to increase the amount slider. Okay, and that does a good job, right? It sharpens the eyes. If you look, it's going to sharpen jewelry. It's going to sharpen everything in here. Radius, again, right around 1.3 or so. Detail, you want to get a little bit more detail in here. We want the photo to look really sharp. What starts to happen? We start to get texture. Here, I'll make it a little worse just so you can see it on the screen. We start to get texture all over the skin here. So that's where we come over into masking and we mask away some of that texture. So when I toggle the before and after, you could see the sharpening is really relegated to a lot of the detailed areas in the photo, but areas like their skin, their shirts, things like that, it's the masking's actually going to hide from those areas. So that's how it works. You saw how it worked on landscape or outdoor photo, which honestly, other than the sky and clouds, most of the time you can get pretty high on detail. But over here, you got to keep the detail pretty low. If you do start to move it a little bit higher, you're going to have to counteract it with your masking slider because you're not going to want it to go in and sharpen their skin texture and anything like that. Then it just makes it worse and kind of enhances it rather than do what we always do with skin textures. We try to kind of lessen that type of an effect. Noise reduction comes in handy if you're going to be shooting at higher ISOs. We can take a look at this photo here, 3200 ISO, and we don't see it on the screen here, but as I start to zoom in, get a little bit closer, I'll even go a little bit further in. Now we can see all the noise that we have inside here. So Lightroom's got in the detail panel, it's got a whole noise reduction section, and we'll start down here at color because color noise goes away really quick. Color noise is easy to get away, right? There's 0, you bring it up to like 10, and the color noise is pretty much gone. That's before, that's after. So you can see how quickly it goes away. But luminance noise, which is the rest of this greeny type of a look that we have, luminance noise sticks around. So we're going to go over here to the luminance slider, and we'll start to increase that. What's happening here, though? It blurs. That's the way it gets rid of noise, is it blurs the image. Now, it tries to do it intelligently, but it's still, at its very core, it's blurring the photo. All right? Well, you can counteract that with the detail slider. So the detail slider says, all right, well, we're going to crank our luminance up, all right, and things get very blurry. And we'll even take a look at our toggle switch here. That's before. That's after. So the noise is gone, but everything kind of almost looks like a painting. Looks like it's had a blur filter run on it. Well, that's where we come down here to detail, because detail will help bring back detail on the edges. So it'll find those edges and it'll help bring some of that crispness back while still leaving most of this area noise free. You get a little bit of texture in there, but not too bad. And that's one of the downsides. You know, it's like a give and take, right? The more noise reduction you add, the more you blur your photo. The more you blur your photo, the more you need detail. The more you add detail, the more texture you bring back. So, but that's what's going on here. So again, that's before detail, and that's after. Before, and then after. And you can see it does a really good job of making those edges look a little bit more crisp. We could probably pull this back. One of the things I always leave people with when it comes to noise reduction is think of where your final output's going to be. All right. If you're only going to share this photo online, if you're only going to put it online onto your web portfolio, onto your Facebook or Google Plus or Twitter, whatever it happens to be, or email to somebody, if it's not going to get printed, don't worry about noise reduction. It's not worth it, because look at the size of this photo on the screen here. We can't see the noise. The noise is only going to become apparent if we start to print this photo big. Okay, when I say big, I mean, maybe 8 by 10, 11 by 17, getting up there, probably 13 by 19, 17 by 22. Those larger sizes, as we start to print our photos, we'll see it a little bit more. I will also leave you with this. When you print, as the ink hits the paper, it smooths a little bit. All right, so you got to keep that in mind too, because what might look noisy, don't kill yourself trying to get your photo to look like that, right? So that there's no bit of noise inside of there. Don't kill yourself and don't kill your photo, because when the ink hits the paper, it spreads, and a lot of times the noise that we have in our images isn't really even seen in the final print because of just that reason. So keep that in mind, and the best way to do it is just to experiment a little bit. Do a couple of prints with some noise reduction and see when the noise eventually starts to go away because of the printing process, not because of the noise reduction process. Lightroom's got some pretty amazing lens correction technology to help straighten photos in ways that can be a result of either A, having the camera just tilted in the wrong direction, or B, can be a problem of actual lens correction problems using wide angle lenses to take pictures of cities and downtowns and whatnot. So here's a pretty good example. The coastline in Dubai here, and wide angle lens here. If I look at the camera information, I'm pretty sure 24 millimeters. So pretty wide angle lens. And even if I were to go to my crop tool and kind of rotate this a little bit, all right, so it didn't look crooked. It hasn't fixed the fact that all these buildings, these tall buildings, are leaning inward, and this happens a lot when you're taking pictures of any cities, any downtowns, any places like that where you're using a wide-angle lens. You'll find the buildings tend to lean inward quite a bit. So let's go ahead and I'm going to go back to my crop tool and just reset it. And let's check out the lens correction panel, because it does some pretty neat stuff here. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to start over on basic. The first thing you should do is click on Enable Profile Corrections. What it does is it looks at the camera and the lens and then the whole combination of whatever you're using, and it makes a fix based on that, because there's all these profiles for all lenses that exist out. Not all lenses, but most of the lenses that exist out there. And there's profiles. So if I click on this, you could see it adjusts a little bit of the distortion, but it kind of lightens the edges here because it's removing a little bit of vignetting from the lens there. So it's making some automatic adjustments. But what we're going to do now is really get down to what I consider the fun stuff inside of here. And that is this new upright technology. This is actually brand new in Lightroom 5. So what you do right now, it's off. I'm going to click auto. Watch what happens. Look at that. It's gone in here and it's gone in and straightened all of the buildings here for the most part. There's a couple off on the corners that are still a little bit off, but it's gone in and it's straightened the buildings here. So it's done all of this automatically. Before, inside of Lightroom, we could always go over into the manual section and you could start to fix the distortion and maybe fix a little bit of the horizontal problems that we have here, even rotate the photo a little, which I might do after the fact. But this is where you had to go to do everything before Lightroom 5. With Lightroom 5, we just come over here and we just click upright. Again, this was off. That's auto. So it's automatically going in there and it's fixing that for us. So that's a pretty big feature. Then you can go to differing degrees of this. Honestly, most of the time, I just use auto, but it'll level. You can go vertical or full, so it's kind of going across the whole image there, and it kind of even tells you a little bit about what it's doing down here. But for the most part, I think you'll find that auto works really well. If you need to come over here and tweak it, you can always come in here and maybe I'll just adjust the vertical a little bit and just rotate the photo just a hair. And what that inevitably does is it leaves these little empty areas because it's having to kind of maneuver the photo around a little bit. So what you would do here, you could go in and crop it out. Just go to your crop tool and kind of just crop things out there. But the easy way to fix that is just reset the crop tool here, go inside your lens corrections panel, just click on constrain crop, and it automatically removes all that area for you. And then you can even tweak it a little bit more if you need to. Okay, so let's take a look at a couple other photos here. And we can go to, let's just take a look at this one really quick. Not too much that we'd have to do with it. You can see we have some vertical lines that are off here, vertical lines that are off here. Just going to click auto, and it fixes it. And it's pretty cool because it fixes this and it does its best to kind of keep that intact over here too. And don't forget, you can always come over here to manual, and you can always go in here and kind of tweak it around if you need to a little bit. So that helps. And again, a little bit, the other photo that we saw was a really wide angle, kind of pulled back shot of a city. Same thing here. We go over to basic, hit auto, and it goes in there and straightens all your buildings. Just keep in mind that there are times where you're gonna have to crop out areas. So if you are shooting like this, I always tell people, shoot a little bit loose, shoot more area than you think that you need, because you never know if you're going to have to go in here and correct it, because you will have to crop out some areas on the side. So you don't want to lose really necessary parts of the photo because you had to go in here and fix any of those perspective problems. So that's all under the lens corrections tab. Really big step forward inside of Lightroom 5 with this whole upright technology, and I think it's going to help. I think it's going to help make fixing your photos when it comes to perspective problems and getting it all done in Lightroom that much easier. We touched on camera calibration and the camera calibration panel earlier when we talked about the process version and what we can do with the different process versions, and also about these profiles that come when we're shooting in the RAW format. There's also some sliders below here. I wanted to at least bring them up, let you know what they're there for. It's not something that most people will probably encounter the need for, but I figure we'll at least let you know what they're there for. So generally, these sliders are going to be used when you're in a color managed workflow, not necessarily your own color managed workflow, to where you just want, photos that come off your camera onto your computer, and then they get on your computer and you want to make sure they get printed okay and everything. Everybody's kind of in that color workflow. But this is more in a color workflow where you're doing work with other people, and you have to make sure that how your camera is seeing red is how your computer is seeing red, is how 3 other people's computers are seeing reds, because maybe you're working with a catalog and your photos are going to end up in a catalog. And you have to make sure that these colors are managed all the way along the process here. And that's why you're able to go in here and calibrate, because every camera does kind of tend to capture colors a little bit differently. So what you would do is, we have a good example here. I'm using a color, let's just zoom in a little bit here, a color calibration chart. This one's it's called the Spider Checker from Data Color. And essentially what it is, it has all these different colors on here, and maybe your camera shoots where your reds are a little bit orangey. So you could come over here under red primary and kind of make them a little bit more red. I don't think that's the case here, but I'm just using that as an example. But you can see as I move the red hues, how it changes things, and as I move the red saturations, how it changes things. So if somebody was, again, maybe you're working with a catalog or some type of a print agency, and they're saying, hey, your reds are not saturated enough, you could come over here and create basically a calibration for that. Same thing with greens, same thing with blues. And then what you could do here is you could save this as a preset, and you could apply it to other photos. And honestly, if you're in that situation, Data Color, which is the name of the company that makes this, when you buy this, you actually get software. And it's software, so you'd have the person hold it up just like I did. It's software that it installs as a little plugin onto Lightroom. And it goes in here and it captures this out of the photo. It then examines each one of these colors, and it actually makes a profile and puts a profile right into the list over here for you, so that you can choose that profile if you ever need to for other photos that maybe, again, you're working with another person. So if you are in that situation, you'll know that you can do it manually here, and you can adjust all these little sliders here and manually adjust the profiles and the calibration of what colors are here for your camera. However, If you are in that situation, I'd probably take it that next step and buy something like this, because it does come with the software that pretty much takes care of doing all this. It takes care of doing all that for you, so you don't have to do it. You're just left with a profile that's very easily applied to this photo or as many photos as you ever need to. Folks, we're going to get into probably one of the coolest parts of Lightroom, and that is presets. Presets. People love Lightroom presets, and rightly so. So let's take a look at just what a preset is. So for example, let's say I make a couple of changes to this photo. I'll tweak the exposure, maybe make it a little bit warmer, open up shadows just a hair, a little bit of blacks, some vibrance. Maybe I'll come down here and I'll turn it into black and white. And maybe I'll tweak the black and white a little bit too. Come down and add some tint to it with the split toning panel. And then even come down here to the effects panel and put a little bit of a vignette around it. And then finish it off and add some of that grain that we saw in one of the previous videos. So I've done this group of settings to the photo. And what happens if you come across another photo and you're like, man, I'd love to apply those settings, but you didn't copy the settings, you didn't do anything like that. You know, this could be weeks later and you're like, man, I really, like, I had a good group of settings for that one photo that I converted to black and white and added some grain to and whatnot. Well, that's where presets come in, because they're like little recipes. You can make them once and you can apply them to all your photos as many times as you want later. So we'll go over here to the presets panel, click on the little plus icon, and I'll just give it a name here. I'll just call it Lightroom class preset. All right, it can go in a folder. So I've got some preset folders here: Lightroom 3, Lightroom 4, Lightroom 5 presets, NAP, user presets, or you can make your own new folder. So for example, if you love black and white and you make a lot of black and white presets, create a folder called black and white presets, put all your black and white presets in there. The way that presets work is you tell it what you want to save. All right, so in this case, I always start by checking none, and I tell it, do I want to save the white balance? Sure. Here's a tricky part though. Basic toning settings. So in this example, I increased the exposure a little bit. Well, if I save that, if I kind of, for lack of a better term, if I like bake it into the preset, then every photo that I apply this to better be underexposed a little bit, because it's going to increase the exposure for all those photos. So sometimes including your basic tone and white balance settings inside of a preset might not be what you want. But in this case, maybe you do want to do clarity, and we did our black and white treatment, and we did some split toning, and we did some vignetting, and we did some grain on this. So maybe I'll just add those things into the preset, but I won't leave any of the toning settings on the preset, because I'll assume that the next time that I apply this preset, I'll have already gone in and set the exposure of whatever photo that I have to be working with. And really all I want is the effect. I want the black and white and the split toning and the vignetting and the grain. So that's what I want to include in it. So we'll go over here, we'll hit create, and you'll see it comes up right down here, Lightroom class preset in whatever folder that I put it in. And let's go to another photo. So here's why presets are so cool. You're working on a photo and you think, hey, I know that I have a great look for this. Let me give it a try. Come over here to your presets panel, click on it, and it automatically applies those settings to the preset. Okay, it's setting for setting exactly as they were. And you'll notice, since I didn't include any of the toning settings, it left the toning settings under the basic panel alone from how I had the photo processed previously. And that's the key here. Let me undo. Let's undo for a second. Look, here's all the toning settings. I'm just going to click on this preset. Notice they all stayed exactly the same, because the preset didn't have that in there. So I could always come in here and tweak it later on if I want. Even if it was included in the preset, you're not stuck with whatever image it gives you. You can of course go in and tweak all the settings after the fact. And honestly, I think that's the way you would use them. Very rarely are you going to find a preset that's like it works perfectly on every photo all the time. All right, they're great starting places. They're a great way for you to put a lot of settings that you use commonly into a little recipe over here. But of course, I think you're always going to have to go in and just kind of mess with the photo a little bit after the fact, because every photo is going to be different. All right. As far as presets go, one of the things and you'll notice I have like a preset problem over here. It's bad. just folder after folder after folder after folder of presets. A lot of presets out there. I have a website called Lightroom Killer Tips. Here it is. And I give away lots of free presets on this website. So you can just click on the presets link right up here at the top and it'll take you to all the presets. And as you scroll down, and it's a blog as well, so it'll help you out. I post there news and tips and tricks and videos and all kinds of different things on the blog. So that'll help you out as well. A couple other things. Back over here to our presets panel. If you wanted to see the preset, and more importantly, maybe share it with another friend of yours that uses Lightroom, you could just go and right click on the preset and choose Show in Finder. Okay, and it'll show you exactly where your presets are. More importantly, if you wanted to share it with somebody, just hit Export. Just hit Export and it's going to save a little preset file wherever you tell it to. I usually tell it to put it on my desktop and it'll save a little preset file. And that way when you go onto the other computer, what they would do is they would come over here and they just right click and choose Import. And they could go select that little preset file that you gave them and they could import that preset right into their own version of Lightroom. So presets work across platforms, Mac, PC, they work exactly the same. You can import, export, share, put them on the web, do whatever you need to. And again, it's been a hugely popular area inside of Lightroom. So give it a try. I think in the end it'll save you some time. They're great candidates. Things like effects, cropping, post-crop vignetting. Those work really good for presets because there's something that you do to a photo all the time. And that way, by putting it as a preset, I can just come over here and I can click on it. I'll give you one last little tip here. If you go under the Navigator panel, as you hover over a preset, you don't even have to click it. As you hover over, it shows you a preview of what that preset looks like. All right, so let's say there's a bunch of black and white ones here. So just as you hover over and you see that little preview over here, it shows you. I don't even have to click on it and apply it. All right, give them a try. Check out my website, Presets Rock. Enjoy. Lightroom's always had a little brush for removing spots. And when I say spots, I mean those little sensor spots and dust and whatnot. They get on your sensor and no matter how good you are that you seem to change lenses for some reason, I'll zoom in. For some reason, we always get these little things on our photos here. So Lightroom's got a little tool up here. It's in this little toolbar. It's called the Spot Removal tool. All right, I click on it and it's really easy. It's got a brush size. You just make it as big as you need to. And all you do is just click and it automatically fixes for you. That's it. Nothing else to it. Fixes for you. You can change the opacity if you need to go halfway in between. There's two options. One is clone, one is heal. Almost all the time I just leave it on heal. All right, I just wanted to kind of look at all the areas around what I'm clicking on. Instead of cloning, pixel for pixel, I wanted to kind of look at it and heal it, which kind of does a little meld between wherever I click and wherever it picks to fix on. All right, so this is the spot that I click on. This is what it's fixing it with. And I can move that around. If there were clouds in the sky, if it found a spot that just wasn't fixing it quite right, I can move it. Let's say I put it down here. I wouldn't want it down here because it's a different shade of blue. But just so you can kind of get an idea. Now, Lightroom 5, they added a brand new feature that I love. Love. It is visualize spots. Because they're so hard to see. That's the problem. On your screen, a lot of times you miss them. And when you do see them, you see them when you go and you print the photo. Whether you print it or whether you have it printed for you, you're spending your time, you're spending your money, and you get the photo back and you see it big rather than small on screen, and it's got these little spots in it. Most people probably won't see them, but you're still bummed because you spent a lot of time and you spent a lot of money and you want your images to be perfect. So there's a little visualize spots checkbox down here. You can kind of move that slider around and it shows you. So here is another one. So I'll just make the brush a little bit bigger. Here's another one down here. Here's one. And that should hopefully be it. So it just it makes it easier for you to actually see the spots. And when you're done, you got it turned on, just turn it off, or just click the done button and it'll automatically shut it off. Another cool thing is you'll notice that a lot of times, if you've got one photo with spots on them, every photo you take after that would have the spots in the same place, right? Like every photo I took after this one is going to have those same spots in it. Well, what you can do is you can fix one photo and remember the synchronize button. And I know I'm just using that as an example. I know this photo isn't the same, but let's just say this photo right here was one that I took right after this one. I could shift click, just like we synchronized photos of the exposure and the white balance and all that. You can hit your sync button down here, and one of the options that we have to sync is spot removal. So it'll go through and it'll remove the spots on all the images that you chose, because again, it stands to reason that if they're there in one photo, until you get your sensor clean, they're going to be there in every single photo after. So you can synchronize that as well. Don't forget, just come right down here, hit sync, just turn on spot removal. Lightroom will take care of the rest for you. So the tool itself, not new inside of Lightroom 5. This little checkbox down here, which I absolutely love, and I think it makes it so much easier to fix your spots and to actually visualize and see your spots. This one is brand new inside of Lightroom 5. Give it a try. I think you're going to love it. This next feature is huge. This is a brand new feature in Lightroom 5. And it's, you know, if you were to go ask 10 photographers, why they ever leave Lightroom to go into Photoshop, they would tell you that retouching, all right, mostly cloning and healing, the things that we really can't do in Lightroom, because before Lightroom 5 we had this little circle brush, we had the spot removal tool, but all it did was spots, all right. You couldn't actually brush. It was just a little circle. You could just click. You couldn't brush with it like a brush inside of Photoshop. Well, in Lightroom 5 they added, under that same brush, now you can actually do cloning and healing. So it's got clone and heal options, but the big change is you can now brush with it. Let me show you. So I'm going to turn on heal, and I'm just going to click and paint, just drag right over that telephone wire. Watch what happens. Look at that. Gone. It's it. There's nothing else I have to show you here. It's that cool, and it's a huge feature because it's one of those things that, you know, when we use Lightroom, people love Lightroom. All right, Lightroom has become like the favorite program of photographers, and so much so that so many photographers I know don't want to leave Lightroom to go to Photoshop anymore. You know, they love Lightroom; it's become their home, but they're like, oh God, I got to go into Photoshop and clone out this little garbage can or this telephone wire or whatever it happens to be, some little distraction in your photo. Now we can do a lot of that stuff right here inside of Lightroom, and it's all non-destructive. It shows me exactly the area that I fit, and I can even move it. I can say I want to change it, so I can even move it around and change what I fixed it with. It is non-destructive. If I ever want to, I can just hit the reset button and I can just start over again and fix it that way. Okay. Don't forget, you still have a brush size and brush opacity. So if you wanted to just kind of soften something, you could reduce the opacity a little bit. And here, I'll show you what it does with the telephone wire, which is not what we want. But if you were retouching something where you didn't want it to necessarily be totally gone and kind of just reduce the impact and the effect of whatever distraction or whatever happens to be on the photo, then you can just reduce the opacity there. So great new feature, and like I said, it's one of those things. It's one of those things that'll help keep us inside of Lightroom and help us from adding the complexity of going into another program just to remove some little things that we know that we can do so easily now that we have it right here inside of Lightroom. If you've got photos with red eye in them, you'll notice that we have a red eye reduction tool right here in this little toolbar here. So just open up your red eye photo. You're gonna probably have to zoom in enough that you can really see the red eye here. And all you have to do is just simply click, and Lightroom will take care of it for you. It pretty much senses the amount of red eye. Watch here. I'm going to zoom in even further so you can see what's happening here. Because you can click and drag, and you can size it to be exactly as you need it to be, and it'll fix it. But watch, I'm just going to click here. Watch. Hold on. Unable to find eye. You're kidding me? It found all the other eyes. Does this ever happen to you? Let's reset. Let me see if I click here. Are you kidding me? You know? Some people could stop and they could redo the video. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to make Lightroom work. Here, let's try it again. Let me zoom there. Nope. Let's see if it finds her eyes. Okay. There we go. Oh, look, it found that one. Let's try it again. Click. There we go. Sometimes, you know what I found? If it doesn't work the first time, try it at least 9 times after, and it'll work just fine. So I don't know why it wasn't finding it, but it will. As you know, you could see the size of the tool here, and you can adjust that size with the right and left bracket tools. Okay. or bracket keys. So say I'm adjusting it, and so maybe I'll just adjust it just to make it big enough to cover the eye. Click, and it automatically finds the area to fix. So that's pretty cool. And you could always come over here. You can click to select an eye. Just click, and then you could adjust the pupil size. Ooh, hold on, we got to zoom in because that's a good look. Hold on, let's check it out here. Woo! So sorry, I know, very immature, but you can adjust the pupil size. You can also adjust the darkening, the darkness and brightness of it, because sometimes when you fix it, sometimes it goes from becoming red eye to gray eye, and that's not any better. So you can go in here and you can make that pupil a little bit darker if you need to. Let's take a look at the graduated filter. This one is a huge favorite amongst Lightroom users. So here's a scenario. Here's a photo that we edited earlier. And you see we can go in here, we can adjust exposure, and we did white balance. We kind of warmed the photo a little bit if you don't recall. We could control the highlights a little bit here, open up the shadows, right? So we've gone in and we've edited the photo. The problem is the sky is still really bright. Well, if you go over here to the graduated filter, what you can do is you can edit a specific part of the photo basically using a neutral density graduated filter like you would use in the field when you were taking the picture, but instead we didn't use one. We can do it after the fact, and we get so much more control with it. Here's how it works. Bunch of sliders that look almost exactly like the basic panel plus a couple, and I bring the exposure down, and then I just click and I drag. Look at that. Here, let me undo, bring the exposure down again, watch. Look at that. So I'm able to now just work on the sky, and it's almost like using a neutral density graduated filter like we would use, like we would put in front of our camera in the field, but we're doing it after the fact. But to me, it's got so much more potential because now I can control it. You know, when I'm out in the field, I'm relegated to just looking at that little picture on the back of the LCD to try to make a decision, where now, you know, because I didn't use that graduated filter, I can do it after the fact. I can tone down the entire sky. I can pull down the highlights if I want to. But I got a couple of little tricks for you here, because unless, you know, you're very rarely going to come up with that situation where the horizon is perfectly straight and there's nothing that goes over the horizon. All right, you're going to have trees, you're going to have mountains, you're going to have whatever buildings, whatever it happens to be, and you're never going to have this perfect line. And that was a problem even if you used the neutral density filter, the graduated neutral density filter in the field. Well, here's a couple of little things that can help you here inside of Lightroom. One of them is the shadow slider, because typically what's going to happen is it's going to darken everything as it goes down, right? If I open up the shadow slider, check out the trees right here, watch. But look at the sky. The sky stays the same. But now I can kind of get the best of both worlds. I can open up some of the detail on those trees and not get that really, really dark line that goes from the top to the bottom. So I can open up some of the detail on those trees, but I'm still darkening the sky. Here's another one. You'll notice, because remember back when we developed this photo, okay, if you follow it along, one of the things that I did was I warmed it. I really like that warm early morning feel to it. So I added I increased the temperature slider, moved it over to the right. Well, when we're in the graduated filter and I'm making adjustments, notice one of the things I can do up top is adjust the white balance, because when I warmed the photo, it warmed everything, including the sky, which it kind of gave it this kind of almost warm, muddy, brownish type of a color to it. So I can come over here and take the temperature slider and I can move that to the left. Look at that. Now I can get the nice crisp blue sky, but I can still keep everything up here nice and warm and get that nice early morning feeling while still having a good blue sky, versus what we had here where everything in the entire photo took on the same color temperature, including the sky that was up top. Now I can go over here and I can make it a little bit more blue. I can add saturation up in there. I can add clarity. Clarity works great up top in the clouds there. So lots of neat stuff that you can do with this. Nobody says you can just add one. You can go over here, click on new, and I can add another one. Maybe I want to brighten something, which I don't, but maybe I want to darken the bottom a little bit, but I don't want to do it so much, and I don't want to do all the things that I would do from the top. So maybe I just kind of darken the bottom just like that. All right, and you can see what we can do there with it. So you can add multiple graduated filters onto the image. You can extend. So what does this do? All it does is when you drag up or down on these two little lines, this is a harsh and this is a soft transition. That's all it does, is it just changes the transition between these two areas here. If you bring your cursor in toward the center, you'll see it goes to like a little rotate arrow. So I can rotate it and I can move it around if I need to as well. If I ever want to just get rid of it, just hit the delete key. Hit the delete key, get that cool little explosion that happens inside of there, and you'll notice it puts a little kind of little circle icon for every one that you add, right? So you'll notice now I have this one, the one with the little meatball in the middle, that's your selected one. That's the one that whenever you make adjustments, it's going to work on. This one is independent. If I want to change this one, I click on it. Now I can make adjustments to that one, and it'll leave this one alone. So if you're wondering which one is active, it's the one just with the little circle filled in the middle of it. And again, if you ever need to, just hit close. Don't forget, everything you do here is all non-destructive. So you're just one click away. You can hit reset and it'll take you right back. I'm going to undo for a second. I want to show you one last thing. Show edit pins. Auto, always, selected, never. I suggest you keep it on auto. Always will leave the pin always on there, which kind of gets annoying. Selected is only selected. Never is bad, because never you can't even see it. And you're like, I know something's there. How come I can't see it? So I always suggest auto, because when I move my cursor in and I want to do something with it, maybe I want to move it around, I can. As soon as I move my cursor off of the image, it hides it so that I can actually look at my photo without having a little dot right in the middle of it. There's a brand new filter inside of Lightroom 5, and it's called the radial filter. Probably one of the most poorly named filters inside of here, but think of it as a spotlight filter. All right, and here's what it'll do. We saw what the graduated filter does, right? You've got all these different things you can click and you can drag. And what I've seen a lot of people, and I've even done this, where I've kind of done this and brought one in from this side and just tried to spotlight a certain part of the photo. Well, you're kind of trying to force something to do something that it's not really meant to do. So let's go ahead and reset that. The spotlight, or the radial filter, does just that. So think of it this way. If I go and I add a vignette to the photo, all right, if I go to the effects panel and I add a vignette, what am I doing? It's assuming my subject is right here in the center of the photo, because that's the only choice I have with a vignette. And you'll see it's starting to darken what I really consider to be one of the focal points of the photo right down here. It's starting to darken that because it's just encroaching in toward the center. So that's where the radial filter comes in, is because it lets you kind of do a custom vignette. It lets you pretty much put it wherever you want. So what you would do is, in order to simulate the vignette, you'd bring your exposure slider down a little bit, which is going to darken, and then you just click and drag. And watch that. Look at what happens here. So now I've created essentially a spotlight, and I can look at what happens. Here's the exposure. I'll bring it way down so you can see it. See, it's just putting a little spotlight there. I wouldn't normally keep it down that far, but it's kind of it's kind of like a custom vignette. You're able to put the vignette exactly where you want instead of it going around the edges. And if your subject, if a point of interest in the photo happens to be at the edge, that's when you're going to run into problems with it. But now I've got it here. I can move it around. I can spotlight whatever I want. I can change it. I can change any of the other settings like saturation, desat. I wouldn't want to do that. That would look silly, but anyway, just understand you can change all the same settings inside of here that you could with the graduated filter, which we just saw in the last video. The other thing that's cool about this is you can make multiple ones. So I can click new, and then I can put one over here too. All right, maybe I don't want to make that one quite as dark. And then take a look at our before and after. That's before, that's after. So we're really able to kind of make people focus in on the part of the photo that we want. Just like the graduated filter, these are separate adjustments. So if I want to, I can select this adjustment and I can still come back up here and maybe change it a little bit. Again, we'll take a look. That's before and then that's after. Very, very cool adjustment. Probably it's like it's in there in my top favorite 3 features inside of Lightroom 5, because it's a brand new feature for Lightroom 5, but it's definitely in my top 5 favorite features because it takes care of something that I really always thought was a problem with the vignette settings, in that it would darken something on the edges. Let's take a look at another example here. I'll go ahead and bring the exposure down, and just to show you, we'd fall into the same problem. I add a vignette, maybe increase the midpoint a little bit, and now see we're starting to darken his head. So that's not what we want to do. We go over here, we take our radial filter, click, drag. And nobody says it's got to be a perfect circle. If you hold down the shift key, it will be. But if you let go of the shift key, now I can do kind of an oval shape, move it around, just like that, spread it out a little bit. And it's a really, really nice way to go in there and just kind of spotlight the couple and take focus away from everything else in the background there. All right. The other thing you can do here, you can hit invert mask, and it inverts it. So now it's doing the darkening in the middle. And you just click that. You can control the feather inside of there. So see, as I get to the left, it's going to be a harsh transition. As I get to the right, it's going to be a very soft transition. I kind of like 50%. 50% seems to be a good place for me, so I typically don't come down here and work with that too much. But a hugely, hugely welcomed new adjustment into Lightroom 5, and honestly, it's almost in many cases, except maybe some of my landscape photography, but my people photography, it's pretty much replaced me ever using a vignette, because now I can get perfect control on exactly where I want that focus to be. All right, folks, so you're about to see and witness one of the most, I think, powerful tools that we have here in Lightroom. I will definitely say that this is probably one of the best additions that Lightroom ever got. I think it was added back in Lightroom 2 and kind of improved along the way. It is the adjustment brush. So here's what it is. If you kind of think about what we've been doing, when you go into the basic panel, and really when you go into any panels after that, all the sliders that you're changing here are global changes to the photo. Now, the highlight slider might only affect the highlights in the photo, but it's globally affecting the highlights in the photo. Well, with the adjustment brush, we can brush in selective changes into very specific areas. It's kind of taking the graduated filter and that radial filter, it's kind of taking it to a different level, okay, where you can be very, very specific, because you can have a brush be as small or as big as you'd like. So let's go ahead and turn it on, and you'll see the settings look pretty much just like the graduated or the radial filter. You get all these different sliders here. The big difference is you get a brush size. All right, so you can change the size of your brush. The feathering is how soft the edges of the brush are. At a low feather, the edges of the brush, and I'll make a quick demonstration here. At a low feather setting, see how the edges are not very soft, but at a high feather setting, the edges are very soft. So that's the difference in what those settings are. Flow is kind of like opacity. I typically just leave flow up to 100 here. And basically, we'll kind of go through a couple of different scenarios with the brush. So let's see here. We're going to take the exposure up a little bit. All right. And what I want to do is I want to make these rocks a little bit brighter. They're in the foreground, and I kind of just want to draw your attention to them. And then I kind of want to make a couple other things darker. So it's like dodging and burning. If you really think about the core of what we're doing, that's really what we're doing here. All right, so I'm going to make my brush a little bit smaller. By the way, you can use your right and left bracket keys to do that. And I'm just going to come in here and paint. Just like that, and just like that. A lot of times, you won't know exactly how bright or how dark you want to make them, so you can always go back after the fact, and you can change it. So I can come in here and increase the exposure. You'll notice it's got some other things too. It's got, clarity, which clarity might not work good on all parts of the photo, but you can brush it into the areas that you want. It's got saturation. We've got sharpness. I can make those rocks even sharper, just the rocks themselves. I can control the temperature and the tint. If you hover over the photo, you'll see one of those little dots, the same thing that we saw with the graduated filter and the radial filter, which means that I can click on New, maybe change my exposure setting here, and I can go in and I can paint on a couple other areas. Maybe I'll paint along these trees here. All right. And then I'll click new again. Maybe I'll take the exposure down. Now I'll do like the burning. All right. So I'll come over here and maybe paint on the mountain a little bit, make that darker. And I'm even going to come over here. Like all the grass over here, I don't think really adds to the photo that much. So I'd probably go in there and darken that. And then I can choose and make the exposure even darker after the fact. So really at its core, it is like dodging and burning. If you come down here, there's a little toggle switch. You can toggle it off and toggle it back on. So that would be before and that would be after. All right, let's take a look at a different example here. Take a look at a portrait, and his shirt, really, really bright, kind of almost overpowering, right? Well, we could go in here and we could take our exposure setting down, and I could take my brush and I could paint, and I could make his shirt darker. And what's going to be the problem that we have here? The problem is, I'll make it even a little darker, is I'm also painting over into the background here, and it's a little hard to see. You wouldn't notice it right at first, right? But if I go down here, there's a little option called Show Selected Mask Overlay. This is the overlay that shows you what you've brushed on. If I turn it on, take a look. You could see it turns red, and it shows me everything I've brushed over, which it's showing me I brushed over the background too. So that kind of becomes a problem. Let's go ahead and we'll turn this off for now. And I'm going to hit the delete key. Let's delete that adjustment. And let's go in here and scroll down a little bit. There's a setting called Auto Mask. So what Auto Mask does is it lets you, and I'm going to zoom in on the photo just a little here, is it'll let us take our brush, and we don't have to make it, what we don't want to do, this is what we want to avoid. We want to avoid, with a tiny, tiny brush doing this, because that's when it gets difficult and time consuming. So this will let us use a bigger brush where I can paint, and right along the sides here, right, and I'll make my exposure a little bit darker, just so you can see it. So I'm painting along the sides here. Let's even bring the highlights down. Painting along the side, right? Half of my brush has extended out into the background, right? But look at what's happening. Lightroom is keeping all of my adjustments in to that edge. If I turn on the overlay, look at it. See that? See how it's kept it right along that edge there? And that's because I had that auto mask feature on. What it's really looking at is that little crosshair in the middle. It's making sure as long as I keep that crosshair in the middle, as long as I keep it over what I want to paint, doesn't matter that half the brush is outside what I want to paint, it's looking at your crosshair. The second I move that crosshair over, you can see all bets are off, so it starts to get bad. But as long as that crosshair stays on what you want to paint, there's got to be some contrast there. That's the key, right? I could never say I want to make this green darker but not this yellow, because there's not enough contrast there. So it's going to start to bleed into both areas. And again, you can just turn your overlay off. It's also got the same edit pins that the graduated filter and the radial filter have, so you can control how often you want to see them. Again, I prefer the auto method, which essentially, when you hover in on your photo, you see the pins. When you come out of your photo, you don't see the pins anymore. Okay, folks, get used to this tool. Probably one of the most powerful tools that you'll use here in Lightroom. One of the things that really will take your editing to that next level, and also make it so that maybe you don't have to go into Photoshop to do some changes, because now you can get a lot of those selective changes done right here inside of Lightroom. I'll leave you with one little tip, and I've mentioned this tip before, but I use it a lot with the adjustment brush. You'll see that I've maneuvered a couple of settings here. If I ever want to get all the settings back to 0, I can just double click the word effect. They all go back to 0. All right. Or you can choose from a list of presets in here too. So if you wanted, if you had a bunch of settings that were moved right along here and you want all of them to go back to 0 except exposure, you can just hit exposure here, and then that'll let you move your exposure slider and adjust that one here. But you'll see there's even presets in here for dodging and burning, all kinds of stuff. So get used to this tool. Seriously, it is one of the best tools that we have here inside of Lightroom. You'd be amazed how much portrait retouching you can get done right here inside of Lightroom with the adjustment brush. I think it's one of those things that gets overlooked way too much, and people jump into Photoshop when times I really don't think that they have to, especially when you add the fact that we just got cloning and healing in Lightroom 2 and Lightroom 5, like a cloning and healing brush. You can get a lot of your basic portrait retouching done right here inside of Lightroom. So I want to show you how. I'll preface this in the beginning by saying if you're watching this and you are a high-end fashion portrait retoucher, it's not for you. You're still going to use Photoshop and you're still going to do all the same things that you did in Photoshop. But I think for most of us who take pictures and probably don't get paid for retouching, right? If you do a family portrait shoot, you do a studio portrait shoot of somebody, chances are you're not able to add a line item into your bill for portrait retouching. If you're taking pictures of your family and friends, they're not paying you from portrait retouching. We want to be as fast and as quick as we can about it, but still get good results. And I think you can do that inside of Lightroom. All right, so let's go ahead here. Let's zoom way in. So a couple things, if you got any little freckles and things like that, we can always use the spot healing brush to get rid of them here. Just click and you'll see it'll get rid of them. It's got an opacity slider, which I use because it just depends. If it's a blemish of some sort, then a lot of times they'll want you to get rid of it because it'll be gone in a few days anyway. But if it's a freckle that maybe is right near their eye or something like that, and it's part of their personality, then I just reduce the opacity a little bit, and that just kind of helps. It helps keep it there, but just not make it so prominent. Okay, let's go ahead here. We're gonna zoom back out just a little bit here and just kind of talk a couple things about what we can do. We're gonna go to the adjustment brush. One of the first things you can do with the adjustment brush is you can work on the eyes. So let's zoom in on her eyes. By the way, I'm holding down my space bar key and it goes to little grabber hand and I can move the image around. So just hold down your space bar key. So we've got the eyes here. I'll double click effect. If you want to whiten the eyes, what you can do here is increase your exposure a little bit. And then you'll notice that a lot of people will have, and she doesn't, by all means, she doesn't have many, but some little red veins or anything in the eyes. You can increase your exposure and reduce your saturation, and it'll help take that redness out. And then you just adjust the size of your brush, and I'm going to turn auto mask off. Just adjust the size of your brush, and you just come in here and paint. Okay, and I'm going to make it obvious because I want you to be able to see what we did here. I'm going to make it obvious. I'm going to increase the exposure slider. Crazy, right? She's like ET eyes. So we obviously don't want to go that high. But you can see here, so it's brightening the eyes, and it's taking a little bit of that red color out because we took the saturation out. And if you look at the little toggle switch here, that's before. That's after. It's not a huge change, and I hope your portrait retouching isn't a huge change. It's just some tiny little things that when you add them all up, I think they make a difference. So I would go over across and I would do the other eye as well. So let's go over here and paint. All right, and then we're going to hit new. We're going to add another adjustment. I'll double click effect. I'm going to increase the saturation slider, and I'm just going to paint right on the iris here, just to kind of boost the color. If you really want to get creative with it and you want to boost the color even more, or even if you want to manipulate the color, there's a little color swatch down here. You can click on that and you can see here, I can go over to green, I can go to, it's not going to make brown eyes blue, but it will work with the hue that's already there. So remember, she's got, brownish hazel type eyes. I can kind of accentuate that by moving this color saturation a little bit. Let's see if I move it back and forth. Okay, so since she's got brown eyes, I would keep it over toward the orange brown side here. And I wouldn't really adjust it that much anyway, but just wanted to show you some of the possibilities of what you can do with the color in the eyes. All right, next up, so that takes care of her eyes. Let's click that toggle switch. That's before, that's after. You can even, let's go back here. Let me go back and click on this one. This was the one where we worked on the saturation and the color. You can even add a little bit of clarity or even contrast inside of there, and that'll help out. You can even add some sharpness. make it even sharper. We see those really striking sharp eyes, and that's a nice quality in some of our portraits when those eyes are just really crisp. And that's how they get them. They come out of the camera sharp, but they get super sharp inside of Lightroom or Photoshop. So you can paint that sharpness into any part of the photo you want. All right, let's come over here. Let's click New, and let's go down here and work on her teeth. And she, by no means does she have teeth that we really need to adjust the color too much, but I will show you. It's almost along the same lines as the eyes. I would increase the exposure, decrease the saturation to take the yellow out. Probably go a little bit more on the saturation on the teeth than I would the eyes. And then I'll just paint. So it's a little bit of whitening and removing a little bit of yellow, which of course, again, she does not really have here, but I'll just go right along. Just like that. All right. And let's click our toggle switch. That's before. That's after. And the great thing about the adjustment brush is if it's too much, you just pull back. Just pull back on the exposure a little bit. And that way you can kind of split the difference between the two. Okay. Don't forget, if you ever want to see what you've painted on, you can either hover over that little pin. You can kind of see those areas, or you can turn on the overlay itself and you can see any little spots that you might have missed. I could even make my brush smaller with the left bracket key to really get fine-tuned and get into some of those areas. All right, so red teeth. Ooh, back here, you want to see something? See red eyes. All right, sorry about that. Okay, last thing that I would do here, actually two last things. One, while we're still on the adjustment brush, I would click New. So you remember earlier in these videos, we talked about clarity, and I said clarity is tough to use on portraits. It tends to make portraits look just harsh. Well, let's go ahead. I'm going to double click Effect, and let's just crank up the clarity here. And I'm going to use the right bracket key to make my brush a little bit larger. And I'm going to paint on her forehead here. And on her skin. And I'm going to paint. So it gives a really weird, bruised, just bad, harsh look to portraits, right? Yeah, I'll even paint down here on her neck. Okay. So we already know clarity. Clarity is bad for this. But if you go the opposite direction, and you go negative, it doesn't have the effect of harshening or sharpening anything. It has the effect of softening. And so it's a great way to just go in there and just soften some of that skin texture a little bit. Again, we painted right along here on her forehead. If I turn on that toggle switch, turn it off and on, watch. That's before, that's after. Scroll down here a little bit. Just make sure we paint in some of these places. All right, let's turn that toggle switch off. That's before. That's after. Before, after. So you can see it tends to just soften some of that texture. You can see where you've missed and where you want to paint with it. All right. Just like that. We'll turn it back off. Again, let's turn it off before, after. Another little tip for you is you can place adjustments on top of adjustments. So if I click New again and I want to make it even softer, bring it to -100, I can paint again. And I can stack negative clarity on negative clarity. Or if I want something really gritty, if it's a really gritty outdoor kind of urban decay scene with buildings and details, and I want to crank up the clarity, I could stack clarity on top of clarity. So you can stack your adjustments here, and it makes it more pronounced each time that you stack. But again, let's just show you one more time here. That's before. That's after. So it's a great way to go in there and soften the skin a little bit. All right. And then the last thing, it doesn't really have anything to do with the adjustment brush, but since we're talking about portrait retouching, let me zoom in and let's talk about a couple things. We'll go jump over to the spot healing brush. We'll use the cloning and healing, mostly the healing. And maybe I'll just kind of soften just a little bit of under her eyes here. And so I'll brush with it. All right. And you can see, whoa. you could see for some reason Lightroom thought I should pull from down here, but we're gonna, ooh, that would look good right there. Yes, we've done it. Perfect retouch now. But I'll just pull that up so it pulls some skin area that's close. Let's zoom back in, and you'll be able to see what the problem is. It looks like she's got this big patch under her eye of like perfect skin. That's why we come over here and we reduce the opacity, because it helps to blend it in. All right, and I can turn it. Let's go here. Let's turn it off, before, after. And of course, go over and do the same thing for the other eye. If you want to get really picky, I'll zoom way in here, and I'll make my brush really tiny. Left bracket key. All right, and she's got like just a little stray eyelash here, so I could come over and I could paint that away too, and get rid of that. So you've got a lot of different options for portrait retouching that you can do right here inside of Lightroom. You don't ever have to leave Lightroom and go into Photoshop to do it. I think most of the basic things that we would want to do to our photos, we can get done here with the adjustment brush and the cloning and healing tool right here inside of Lightroom 5.